Yo, what's up everyone? It's Supreme Harry, and today we're checking out, what if Harry's inheritance test showed he owned 8 ancient British houses and the throne of magical Britain. Drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1, The Weight of 8 Crowns. The letter arrived before sunrise. Not the Hogwarts one, that came later, carried by a tawny owl that looked almost embarrassed to be second. The first letter arrived at 4:47 in the morning, delivered by a Gringotts courier raven, jet black and the size of a small cat, that landed on the windowsill of the cupboard under the stairs and tapped the wood with the precision of someone who had been told exactly where to go and had no patience for detours. Harry was already awake. He usually was, on his birthday. Not because anyone celebrated it, the Dursleys treated July 31st with the same warmth they reserved for tax season and broken appliances, but because something always happened on his birthday, some quiet shift in the air that he'd never been able to name. He'd learned to lie still and wait for it. This time, it came in the shape of a raven tapping on wood. He opened the small latch on the cupboard window, a modification he'd made himself at age 8 with a bent paperclip and patience, and the bird stepped inside with the gravity of a senior official. It dropped the letter on his chest, regarded him with one amber eye that seemed to be conducting a thorough evaluation, and departed without ceremony. The envelope was heavy. Black wax seal on the back, stamped with a vault key crossed over a sword. Underneath the crest, in letters so precise they looked engraved rather than written, Gringotts Bank of Magical Britain Inheritance and Estate Division to Harry James Potter upon the occasion of his 11th year, private and sealed, magically binding. Upon opening, Harry looked at it for a long moment. The cupboard was dark, but he'd always been able to see well in low light, another thing the Dursleys found unsettling about him. He turned the envelope over. His name on the front was written in the same precise script. Not the boy or the freak, which was what he heard most mornings. His actual name. Both of them. He broke the seal. The parchment inside unfolded itself. There were 3 pages, each dense with formal language, and at the top of the first page, a brief handwritten note that seemed newer than the rest, added recently by someone with cramped, business-like handwriting. Mr. Potter, your inheritance assessment has been flagged as priority tier 1. This means the results were sealed pending your 11th birthday by order of the Goblin High Council and cannot be viewed by any party, including Albus Dumbledore, prior to your review. We strongly advise you to visit Gringotts at your earliest convenience. Your account manager, Ragnarok, is expecting you. Transport has been arranged. Gringotts Inheritance Division. P.S. Do not inform your guardians. Harry read it twice. Then he folded it back up, tucked it under his mattress, which was to say, the thin foam pad that served as one, and lay in the dark thinking for approximately 4 minutes before he decided that whatever was in those pages was going to require him to be somewhere other than the cupboard under the stairs. The second letter arrived at 7, dropped through the front mail slot by an owl that hooted proudly and waited for a treat it wasn't going to receive, because Dudley had already thundered downstairs and scattered the post in all directions looking for birthday cards. Harry retrieved the Hogwarts letter from behind the umbrella stand without anyone noticing. He added it to the stack under his mattress, ate the half slice of toast that fell off the plate when Aunt Petunia wasn't looking, and waited. At 9 o'clock, Uncle Vernon settled into his Sunday posture, newspaper, armchair, the particular brand of aggressive relaxation that meant he was daring the world to bother him, and Harry said, I need to go out. No. I have a letter from my bank. Vernon lowered the paper half an inch. You don't have a bank. Apparently I do. Harry held up the Gringotts envelope. He'd thought about how to handle this on the walk back from the kitchen. Vernon Dursley responded to 2 things, authority and money. The Gringotts envelope looked like both. They want me to come in for an inheritance assessment. It says transport has been arranged, which I think means someone's coming to get me. Petunia made a sound from the hallway that was halfway between a gasp and a hiss. Vernon stood up slowly, the way large men do when they want the act of standing to be a statement. What inheritance? Your lot left you nothing but trouble, Uncle Vernon. Harry's voice was very calm. He discovered somewhere around age 7 that calm voices in the Dursley household were more unsettling than raised ones, because they couldn't be shouted over. The letter says it's sealed. It says no one else could read it before me. That means whatever it is, it's mine. Not yours. Mine. He paused. I think you might want me to go find out what it says. There was a long, ugly silence. Petunia's hand appeared on the doorframe. Vernon's face went through several colors before settling on a mottled red that suggested deep thought happening under significant pressure. Fine, he said, which was one of the shorter speeches Harry had ever heard from him. The transport arrived at 9:15. Harry had half expected another owl, or perhaps a wizard in dramatic robes standing in the garden startling the neighbors. What actually appeared was a small, immaculate black carriage that materialized at the end of the garden path with a sound like a card being shuffled, drawn by 2 horses so dark they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The carriage had the Gringotts crest on the door. The goblin driving it had the expression of someone who found the entire street architecturally offensive. Harry walked out with his Gringotts letter, the Hogwarts letter tucked in his back pocket, and nothing else except the clothes on his back and the quiet, steady sense that today was going to be very different from yesterday. He didn't look back at the house. Gringotts in the morning was a different creature from the Gringotts that tourists and shoppers encountered on a busy Saturday afternoon. At this hour, the marble halls were cool and businesslike, the tellers processing transactions with the focused efficiency of people who found sentiment to be a waste of ledger space. The goblin who met Harry at the door was not one of the door guards. He was shorter, older, with eyes like chips of dark amber and a waistcoat embroidered with small golden keys, and he actually bowed, when Harry stepped out of the carriage. "Mr. Potter," he said. "I am Ragnarok. I manage your family accounts. We have much to discuss." "I gathered," Harry said. They went not through the main hall but through a side passage that Harry would never have noticed if he hadn't been led to it. The door was low and set into the marble, and it opened onto a corridor that went down rather than sideways, lit by sconces that burned with a blue-white flame that cast no shadows. Other goblins they passed stopped what they were doing and watched. Not rudely. More the way people watch when something significant is passing through a room. The office at the end of the corridor was large by goblin standards, which meant it was cramped by human ones, but it was also lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound ledgers and fitted with a desk that was clearly very old and had clearly had very important things signed on it. There was a chair sized for Harry across from the desk, and a velvet stand in the corner that held something covered with a cloth. Ragnarok took his seat. He folded his hands. "Before we proceed," he said, "I want to explain why this assessment was sealed. Not because it is standard procedure, it is not. It was sealed because 31 years ago, when your parents died, someone attempted to access your inheritance file before you came of age. We do not know who. We blocked the access. We sealed the file. We notified no one. Gringotts does not involve itself in wizarding politics." He paused. "However, we do honor the law. And the law, Mr. Potter, is about to become very relevant." Harry said, "Show me." Ragnarok pulled a flat stone dish from a drawer, not unlike what Harry would later learn to call a pensieve, but smaller and set in silver, and pricked his own finger with a small blade, letting 3 drops of what appeared to be black ink fall into it. He gestured for Harry to do the same. Harry held his finger over the dish without hesitating. 3 drops of blood, red against black, and then a slow, brilliant gold spread through the liquid in the dish, and the room did something extraordinary. The ledgers on the walls glowed. Not dramatically, a quiet, golden pulse, like a single note held very low. The parchment that rolled out of a slot in the desk was 6 feet long. Ragnarok caught it, glanced at it, and went very still. He read it a second time. Then he set it carefully on the desk, smoothed it flat, and looked at Harry with an expression that goblins, who have roughly the same number of emotions as anyone else but display approximately a third of them, used only for rare occasions. "Mr. Potter," he said. "You are the heir, by blood and by magical compact, to 8 ancient houses of Britain. The room was quiet. "Okay," Harry said. "You understand what that means?" "Not fully." "Tell me." Ragnar was quiet for a moment, the way that people are when they're deciding how to explain something enormous to someone who is going to need to keep functioning after they hear it. "In the early days of magical Britain," he said, "there were families who didn't merely practice magic. They governed it. They held territory, not just land, but magical territory, places where the boundaries between the physical and magical worlds were thinnest, oldest, most powerful. These families were granted seats on the first Wisengamot and recognized as sovereign within their domains. They were called the Ancient Houses. And I'm heir to 8 of them. You are heir, and in 3 cases direct owner, to 8 of them, yes." Ragnar tapped the parchment. "Potter. Peveril. Gryffindor. Slytherin," Harry blinked. "Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, Emrys, and Pendragon." Ragnar said the last name the way you'd announce a hurricane. "Of the last 2, Emrys through your mother's lineage, which was not as Muggle-born as the wizarding world was told, and Pendragon through a line so old it predates the Hogwarts founders by 4 centuries. The gold in the stone dish had not faded." Harry looked at the parchment. He couldn't read the formal script from across the desk, but he could see the length of it, the columns of properties and assets and titles that ran from top to bottom without apparent end. He looked at the velvet-covered stand in the corner. "What's under the cloth?" he asked. Ragnar rose from his seat, crossed to the stand, and lifted the cloth. It was a circlet. Not a crown in the dramatic, points-and-jewels sense. A band of dark metal, black and silver, or something older than silver, set with 8 stones, each a different color, each no larger than a thumbnail, each burning with a faint interior light. It sat on its stand as if it weighed nothing. It sat on its stand as if it had been waiting. "The throne of magical Britain is not a chair," Ragnar said. "It is an office. The oldest magical office on this island. It predates the ministry. It predates the Wisengamot. When the ministry was formed 3 centuries ago, the throne was declared dormant because there was no eligible heir, there was no one who could claim all 8 houses. The office passed into law as a theoretical construct. The ministry assumed authority in its absence." He paused. "You are the first person in 300 years who can claim all 8. Which means, legally, the Ministry of Magic answers to you." Ragnar said it the way you announce a fact of arithmetic. "Simply. Completely. The Wisengamot cannot override you. The Minister for Magic reports to the throne. Not in practice, not for 3 centuries, certainly not now, but in law. In the oldest law. The kind that cannot be repealed because it is older than the institution that would need to repeal it." Harry looked at the circlet for a long time. He thought about the cupboard under the stairs. He thought about the way Vernon Dursley had looked at him this morning, the calculation, the weighing, the instinctive search for a way to diminish what was happening. He thought about 10 years of being told he was nothing and no one. He thought about his parents. "What were the vaults?" he said. "The ones that were flagged." Ragnar's expression shifted, just slightly. Goblins had a particular look for things that offended their professional pride, and it was currently present. "There are 14 vaults that belong to the Potter and Peveril estates alone, beyond what was registered when you were an infant. A trust vault was established in your name at Gringotts in 1981, which you were presumably told was the primary Potter vault." He paused. "It was not. It was the smallest one. The others, including your parents' main vault, the Black family vault that was designated for you through a sealed will, and the Peveril vault which has not been opened since 1492, were never disclosed to your guardians or to the wizard who filed your legal guardianship." "Dumbledore," Harry said. He hadn't meant it as a question, and Ragnar didn't treat it as one. "The guardianship was filed by Albus Dumbledore on the 1st of November, 1981. We have no evidence that he was aware of the full scope of your inheritance. We have some evidence, very carefully recorded, that he did not look for it. There was something extraordinarily precise in that last sentence. Something that said everything in the spaces between the words. Harry nodded slowly. He looked at the list of properties on the parchment again. Can you tell me where they are? The houses. Ragnarok produced a second, shorter document. Harry leaned over the desk. Potter Manor, Godric's Hollow, ancestral home, sealed and intact since 1981. Peveril Hall, Nottinghamshire, the oldest of them, sealed for 2 centuries, still generating income. Gryffindor Castle, Scottish Highlands, a working estate with sitting staff who had been waiting, apparently, for 200 years for someone to send orders. Slytherin Isle, off the coast of Cornwall, the name alone was going to require some thought. Ravenclaw Tower, a private residence on the Welsh border. Hufflepuff House, Yorkshire. Emery's Cottage, Tintagel, Cornwall, the second Cornwall property, much smaller, much older. And Pendragon Keep, which Ragnarok simply described as requiring a separate meeting to discuss fully. 8 properties. 8 magical territories. Seats on the Wizengamot for 7 of them. And the throne seat, Harry said. Above the Wizengamot floor. It has been physically vacant for 3 centuries. It has also been, legally, if not practically, the highest seat in magical Britain for the same duration. Ragnarok folded his hands again. The question, Mr. Potter, is what you intend to do. Harry looked up from the parchment. I'm 11 years old, he said. Yes. I'm about to start school. Yes. Does claiming the throne require me to stop going to school? Ragnarok's version of amusement was very small and very dry. No. Your claim, once formally registered, is passive. You do not need to sit the throne to hold it. You would need to act as sovereign in matters of wizarding law if you chose to, but you cannot be compelled to act and you cannot be removed. He paused. You can also appoint a regent. A legal representative to hold your seat and voice your position on the Wizengamot until you are of age. Someone you trust. I don't know enough people yet to trust any of them, Harry said honestly. Can I leave the seat formally claimed but unoccupied for now? It is your right. Then that's what I'll do. Harry stood up. He was not particularly tall for 11, the Dursleys' approach to feeding him had seen to that, but standing in this room, having said what he just said, he seemed to take up more space than he physically occupied. I want access to all 14 vaults. I want a full accounting of everything that was moved or altered in my name since 1981. I want the properties unsealed and inventoried. He paused. And I'd like to know who you think the best goblin-appointed legal advocate in Britain is, because I have a feeling I'm going to need one very soon. Ragnarok's amber eyes were very bright. Sharp Fong, he said. She has made senior advocates weep in Wizengamot chambers and regarded the experience as neutral. He rose, bowed, again, that real bow, and said, It is an honor, Lord Sovereign. Harry blinked. No one had ever called him anything with the word honor in it before. It felt deeply strange. He suspected he'd need to get used to it. Harry's fine, he said. Ragnarok's expression suggested that he would not be doing that. The vault tour took 3 hours. Harry had been told, in the vague and nonspecific way you tell an orphan heir a convenient minimum, that his parents had left him something. He'd imagined a modest amount of gold, perhaps a few keepsakes, the kind of inheritance that was meaningful but not world-altering. The word meaningful seemed, in retrospect, to have been doing a great deal of heavy lifting. The main Potter vault was 3 levels below the Trust vault, accessible by a different cart, on a track that moved faster and deeper into the earth with the serious momentum of something that meant business. When the door opened, the gold inside was not a tidy pile. It was architectural. It filled the space the way furniture fills a room, in organized sections, galleons stacked in columns that reached the ceiling, cases of rare magical artifacts, rows of sealed trunks, bookshelves of what appeared to be first-edition magical texts that a librarian would have cried over. The Peveril vault was older. Colder. The items in it made Ragnar narrate very quietly, the way museum guides speak in rooms where shouting would be disrespectful. Harry walked through it seeing things he had no context for yet, objects that hummed, that shivered, that seemed to turn slightly toward him as he passed, as if recognizing something. At the back of the vault, in a glass case on a stone plinth, were 3 items. A wand of elder wood. A stone, smooth and dark. And a piece of folded silvery fabric that, when Harry reached toward it, seemed to fold the light itself. The Deathly Hallows, Ragnar said, very softly. Your ancestors collected all 3. They were stored here after the last Peveril died. The invisibility cloak was removed from this vault in 1981 and is currently in the possession of Albus Dumbledore, who claimed it was given to him freely by your father. He paused. Gringotts has no record of a formal transfer. Harry looked at the empty bracket where the cloak had presumably sat. He looked at the Elder Wand and the Resurrection Stone. He closed the case very carefully. Note that, he said. For Sharp Fang. Already done. The Slytherin vault surprised him the most. He'd braced for dark artifacts, something threatening, something that would require careful handling. What he found instead was a vault that felt like a library crossed with a laboratory, rows and rows of research, notebooks, correspondence, a body of accumulated knowledge about magical theory that went back to the medieval period. There was a sealed letter on a stand near the entrance, addressed in green ink to the rightful heir of all houses, and Harry pocketed it to read later because if he stopped to open it now they would be here for another 3 hours. By the time they surfaced, it was early afternoon and Harry had a leather satchel that Ragnar had produced from somewhere, magically expanded, bottomless, keyed to his magical signature, containing the inheritance documents, copies of all the property deeds, the formal sovereignty claim which he'd signed with his blood on a document that immediately filed itself with the Wisengamot's registry, and a card for Sharp Fang the legal advocate. He'd also been given something else. Your parents left a letter, Ragnar said, when they were back in the office. Both of them. Separately. They are stored in the Sovereignty Archive, charmed to open only to you, only once, and only when you are ready to read them. He set 2 sealed envelopes on the desk. They were old, 10 years old, yellowed at the edges, written in the month before his parents died. These are copies of the originals. The originals remain in the vault. Harry looked at them for a long moment. His mother's handwriting on one, looping and worn, and his father's on the other, larger and slightly impatient-looking, the way people write when they have a lot to say and limited time. He put them in the satchel. Later. He'd need to be somewhere quiet and alone for those, and he was neither yet. He was back on Privet Drive by 4 in the afternoon. The Gringotts carriage deposited him at the end of the path with a finality that felt like punctuation, and then vanished with the same shuffle card sound it had arrived with. Harry walked up to the front door with his satchel over his shoulder, and he rang the bell, because he'd never actually had a key. Petunia answered. She took one look at the satchel, the way Harry was standing, and something moved through her expression, a complicated shadow, something almost like recognition. She'd grown up with Lily. She knew what a person looked like when the magical world had just handed them something enormous. Well, she said. I'm going to need my room back, Harry said. Not the cupboard. The spare bedroom. And I'm going to need to be allowed to write letters without you reading them. And I'm going to go to Diagon Alley tomorrow to get my school things. Petunia stared at him. Just like that? You walk in and make demands. Yes, Harry said, which was not how he'd normally have put it but was accurate. I also wanted to tell you that as of this morning, I am the legal owner of Potter Manor in Godric's Hollow and 7 other properties. Which means technically, he paused, letting her do the arithmetic herself, I could find you alternative housing any time I chose. He was not threatening. His voice was still the same calm, even tone. He was simply explaining the situation. I don't want to do that. I want to go to school and learn. But I do need the bedroom. Petunia's face went white, then a rigid pink. She stepped aside. He was almost at the stairs when she said, "Your mother would have told me." The words were strange, compressed, as if they'd been waiting years for an exit. If any of this was real before, she would have told me. She couldn't, Harry said, without turning around. He thought about the sealed letter in his satchel, his mother's handwriting on the front. She was trying to protect people. She kept a lot of secrets to protect people. He paused. "I'm going to try very hard not to do the same thing." He went upstairs. The spare bedroom had a real bed, a window that looked onto the garden rather than the underside of the stairs, and a desk that he immediately claimed by putting the satchel on it. He unpacked it methodically, inheritance documents in one stack, property deeds in another, Sharpfang's card, the Hogwarts letter he hadn't opened yet, and the 2 sealed letters from his parents, which he placed side by side on the desk and stood looking at. He opened his father's first. "Harry, if you're reading this, your mother and I are gone, which means everything went wrong and I couldn't stop it. I'm writing this because I need you to know some things that Dumbledore won't tell you, not because he's a bad man, he isn't, but because he thinks you'll be safer if you don't know them. I've always thought that was rubbish. Safe people are people who know what's happening to them. You are going to inherit a great deal. More than we told anyone. We kept it quiet because people who know what you own want to own you. Don't let them. The most important thing I can tell you is this: the magical world is not what they'll teach you it is. It is much older, much stranger, and the rules they'll give you are new rules painted over very old ones. When the old rules and the new rules conflict, the old rules win. Remember that. I am very sorry I won't be there. Your dad, James. P.S. The invisibility cloak was not given to Dumbledore. He borrowed it. There's a difference. Harry read it twice. Then he set it down very carefully and opened his mother's. "My darling, I don't have time to write everything I want to say. I am making this letter as brief as I can because I have been awake for 2 days and Voldemort is close and I can feel the magic in the house changing, the way magic changes when something ancient and inevitable is moving toward you. You are the heir to something I discovered only 4 years ago, when I started researching my own family line and found out that Muggleborn is not what I am. My mother's family, your grandmother's family, goes back to a line so old it forgot itself. I come from Emrys. I know that means very little to you now. It will mean everything later. I want you to know that the magic you carry is not dark or dangerous or something to be afraid of. It is old. Old and warm and yours. Let it teach you. Don't let anyone tell you to lock it away. You will find the world treats you like a symbol. Like a story. You are not a story. You are my son. All my love, always, Mom." He sat with both letters for a long time. The evening light came through the window he'd never had before and lay in gold bars on the carpet. Downstairs, he could hear Dudley watching television, Petunia washing up, Vernon doing what Vernon always did, all the ordinary machinery of the household running its ordinary course. It occurred to Harry, sitting in the growing quiet, that he was going to need to go back to Gringotts. He was going to need to meet Sharpfang. He was going to need to go to Diagon Alley and buy school supplies and find a wand and start, somehow, to build a life in the world his parents had died trying to protect. He had 8 houses, a dormant throne, 14 vaults, and a 6-foot parchment scroll laying out a legal inheritance that would make the Wizengamot uncomfortable for the foreseeable future. He had no friends, no knowledge of the magical world, and no idea how to use magic intentionally. He was 11 years old and he'd eaten half a slice of toast for breakfast. He opened the Hogwarts letter. "Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." He read through it, front and back. Standard supplies list. September 1st. Platform 9 3/4. He turned to a fresh page in the notebook he found in the desk drawer and started writing things down. Not because he needed to, he had a good memory, always had, but because there was something grounding about making lists when the world had just expanded dramatically in all directions. Things to do: 1. Diagon Alley. All supplies. Don't rush it. 2. Meet Sharp Fong. Set up the Wisengamot notification properly. 3. Get the properties unsealed, at least the ones Ragnarok said were currently maintained. 4. Figure out what the Emery's line actually means. Mum's letter. Research. 5. The letter from Slytherin Vault. Read it. He pulled out the letter from the Slytherin Vault and unfolded it. The ink was green, the parchment thick, and the handwriting was nothing like his father's or mother's. It was old and very deliberate, the kind of writing that comes from someone who learned calligraphy as a matter of course. To the one who holds all 8, if you are reading this, congratulations. You are either the heir we anticipated or someone has found a very clever way to cheat. If it's the latter, this letter will burn, so your continued reading suggests the former. There are things hidden in the 8 houses that form a complete picture when assembled. Salazar Slytherin was not what history says. Neither was Godric Gryffindor. The founders did not fall out over blood purity. That is a story told by people who wanted a reason for a conflict that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with what they'd found beneath Hogwarts. The school was built over something much older. So was the ministry. So, if you look closely enough, was the entire structure of wizarding government. We put the pieces in the houses for the person who could reach them all. We hoped that person would know what to do with them. We were optimistic, as teachers tend to be. Find the chamber first. Not the one everyone talks about. The other one. Harry folded the letter. He leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling of the spare bedroom that had been waiting for him for 10 years. He thought, tomorrow, Diagon Alley. He thought, September 1st, Hogwarts. He thought, there is a chamber beneath the school that no one is supposed to know about, and I have a letter from a founder telling me to find it. He thought, this is going to be an interesting year. Outside, the last of the summer evening was fading into blue. Somewhere in the distance a barn owl called once, sharp and clear, and then was quiet. Harry got up, moved the letters back into the satchel in careful order, took his notebook, and wrote one more line: 6, don't be afraid of any of this. He underlined it. Then he went to bed, in his real bed, in his real room, and for the first time in a decade he slept well. Chapter 2, The King Goes to Diagon Alley. Harry was up before 6. He'd slept well but not long, there was too much moving behind his eyes for long sleep to be possible, and by the time the summer light was doing its pale, tentative thing through the window, he was already dressed and reading through the property inventory Ragnarok had given him. Not because he needed to memorize it, but because he wanted it to feel real. Yesterday had the texture of something dreamed, and he found that running his eyes over the clean, precise figures in the Gringotts documentation helped it settle into the category of actual events. 8 houses. 14 vaults. 1 dormant throne. Real. He folded the documents back into the satchel, picked up the Slytherin founder's letter again, and read it a third time over the sound of Petunia beginning breakfast downstairs. The other chamber. He filed that under urgent but not immediately actionable and moved it to the back of his mind, where he kept things that needed more information before they were worth worrying about. He came downstairs to find Petunia had made extra toast. She didn't say anything about it. Neither did he. But there were 3 extra slices on the plate and his mug already had tea in it, and when Dudley came barreling down and made a grab for Harry's plate out of pure habit, Petunia said, "Dudley, don't," in a sharp enough voice that Dudley actually stopped. Vernon, behind his paper, said nothing. His silence had a quality to it that was different from yesterday's, less aggressive, more wary. The silence of a man who had decided that a strategic retreat was preferable to a confrontation he wasn't sure he'd win. Harry ate his toast and thought about Diagon Alley. Ragnarok had sent him home with a card for a Muggle-side contact in London, a woman named Mrs. Fig, who apparently lived 2 streets over and was a squib who had been, as Ragnar put it with the sort of flat precision that meant there was a great deal more to say, maintaining informal observation of the property for the past decade on Dumbledore's instructions. Harry knew who Mrs. Figg was. She smelled of cats and made him sit through albums of photographs of them whenever Petunia needed him minded. He thought about that for a moment, the idea that the kindly, boring, cat-obsessed woman 2 streets over had been specifically placed to watch him, and filed it in the same growing folder as the Dumbledore notes, the cloak, and the Wizengamot notification. He didn't need Mrs. Figg today. He needed Diagon Alley. He pulled out the second card Ragnar had given him, this one plain white, with only a small printed key on it, and turned it over. Present at the Leaky Cauldron bar before 10. Ask for Tom. A guide will meet you. He told Petunia he'd be back before evening. She looked like she wanted to ask where he was going and thought better of it. He took the bus to Charing Cross Road and found the Leaky Cauldron between a bookshop and a record store, invisible to the stream of Muggles on the pavement, looking like a gap in the world that didn't quite register unless you knew to look for it. Tom behind the bar was ancient and toothless and cheerful in the self-contained way of people who have seen absolutely everything. He looked at the card, said, "Right then," and went to a back table to speak quietly to someone. The someone who came back with him was not what Harry had expected. She was a goblin. Female, taller than Ragnar by a few inches, dressed in charcoal robes with silver buttons and carrying a flat leather case under one arm with the purposeful grip of someone who had never once in their life been without the relevant document. Her face was sharp-planed and extremely alert, with eyes that looked like they'd never missed a misplaced comma in their life. "Sharp Fong," she said, not bothering with a greeting. "You're Potter." "Harry," he said. She gave him the look Ragnar had also given him, though we will not be doing that look, and said, "Ragnar tells me we have 14 vaults, 8 properties, and a sovereignty claim to manage. He tells me a number of things were not properly disclosed at the time of your guardianship filing." She paused. "He also tells me an invisibility cloak was removed from your estate without a formal transfer document. I've already written to the relevant party requesting return or legal justification within 14 days. Harry stared. "You already? I work quickly, Lord Potter. It's why Ragnar recommended me." She opened her leather case and produced 2 sheets of parchment. "Sign these. The first formally retains me as your estate and legal advocate. The second notifies the Wizengamot that the sovereignty claim has been filed and that seat 1, the throne seat, will be observed but not occupied for the duration of your minority. This means they cannot act on anything the throne would have jurisdiction over without your written consent." She paused. "It will make them extremely uncomfortable. I mention this as a matter of disclosure, not as a deterrent." "I appreciate that," Harry said. He signed. Sharp Fong put the documents away with the efficiency of someone who had never wasted emotion. "Now," she said, "you're here for school supplies. I'll walk you to the main alley. I have 3 other stops to make, but we should be seen together in Diagon Alley before word spreads on its own, which it will. Word in the wizarding world moves faster than owls and considerably faster than logic." She turned and headed for the back of the Leaky Cauldron without checking if he was following, because she'd correctly assessed that he would be. Harry followed her into the courtyard, watched her tap the brick sequence with 2 fingers of her right hand in the practiced way of someone doing it from memory, and stepped through into Diagon Alley as the wall folded open. He'd never seen it before. He stood still for one involuntary second at the entrance and took it in, the cobblestones, the shop fronts in their impossible architectural variety, the robes and pointed hats, the owls in cages and cauldrons stacked in windows, the low constant noise of 100 conversations in a space that smelled of parchment and candle wax and something rich and sharp that he couldn't name yet. It was the first time in his life that he'd stood in a place where everything around him was strange and felt, rather than unsettled, a deep and specific sense of recognition. This was his world. "Keep moving," Sharp Fong said, already 3 steps ahead. "Gawking is for tourists." He kept moving. The first person who noticed was a witch in emerald robes outside the apothecary, who looked at Sharp Fong and then at Harry and went very still in the way of someone running a rapid mental calculation. By the time they'd passed the Quidditch supply shop, two wizards outside it had stopped talking and turned to watch. Not rudely, with the particular attention people pay when they see something that doesn't fit the category they'd assigned to it. Harry Potter was supposed to be a story. Orphan, savior, reclusive mystery. The 11-year-old walking through Diagon Alley with a goblin legal advocate and a leather satchel of Gringotts documents was something else. He didn't notice half of them. He was reading the shop fronts. Madame Malkin's first, Sharp Fong said. Robes, then books, then the apothecary. Wand last, Ollivander keeps his own time and you'll want to be finished with everything else before you go in there. Why wand last? Because Ollivander's sessions can take anywhere from 10 minutes to 3 hours and he asks questions you won't want to answer in a hurry. She said this with the confidence of someone who had sent many clients to Ollivander and had learned to schedule accordingly. Madame Malkin's was warm and smelled of good fabric. The shop was well lit and busy for a Tuesday morning, 2 other customers being fitted, a seamstress working on a complex set of formal robes in the back, Madame Malkin herself moving between them with pins in her mouth and a measuring tape that moved on its own. She glanced up when Harry came in, did the same rapid double-take the witch outside had done, and recovered admirably. First year, she said. Yes, Harry said. Up on the stool, love, we'll have you sorted in no time. The bell above the door rang again. Lucius Malfoy entered Madame Malkin's with the kind of presence that expected the room to adjust to him. Tall, white blonde, robes that were clearly expensive and aware of it, a silver-tipped cane that he carried not because he needed it but because it completed a statement about who he was and who everyone else wasn't. Behind him, like a deliberate echo, came a boy Harry's age, same coloring, same robes, slightly less confident in the precise way that suggested he was still learning the performance his father had mastered. Lucius Malfoy's eyes found Harry on the fitting stool, moved to Sharp Fong at Harry's shoulder, and the room shifted in temperature by approximately 2 degrees. Draco, Lucius said, with only a small pause, your robes. Draco Malfoy stepped up onto the adjacent stool, looked at Harry with the frank evaluating stare of someone who'd been taught that sizing people up was a skill worth developing early, and said, First year? Yes, Harry said. Me too. Draco's voice had the slightly over-rehearsed confidence of someone who'd been told how to speak to strangers but hadn't quite made it natural yet. He glanced at the satchel, at Sharp Fong, at the fact that Harry seemed entirely comfortable standing in a robe shop being measured while a goblin advocate held his documents. You're Muggle-raised. I was, Harry agreed. Lucius Malfoy spoke without looking directly at Harry, which was its own kind of dismissal. Madame Malkin, I believe there was an issue with Draco's formal winter robe from last year, the crest stitching needs, Mr. Malfoy, Sharp Fong said. It was 2 words. It was also unmistakably a gavel coming down. Lucius turned. His gaze moved from Sharp Fong to Harry, and this time it stopped and recalibrated. Goblins didn't accompany ordinary clients through Diagon Alley. Senior Gringotts legal advocates especially did not do this. This is Lord Potter, Sharp Fong said, with the flat certainty of someone reading a legal document into the record. He has an appointment this morning to register his Diagon Alley account accesses under his formal estate credentials. I mention this because Lord Potter's estate documents are filed with the Wisingamot as of this morning, and I imagine the relevant members will want to review them. She produced a small card from her case, the same flat, key-printed card Tom had been given, and held it out to Lucius. Lucius did not take it. That was interesting. Most people, offered a card by a senior goblin advocate in a public setting, would take it simply out of social momentum. The refusal was deliberate, which meant he'd already done the calculation and the result had made him cautious rather than curious. Lord Potter, Lucius said. There was something careful moving underneath the smooth surface of the words. I wasn't aware the Potter estates had been formally assessed. They were assessed yesterday, Harry said, from the fitting stool. Madame Malkin's tape was still moving around his shoulders, apparently unbothered by the ambient tension. Turns out no one looked very hard for the first 10 years. That's been corrected. He paused and looked at Lucius with the direct, unhurried attention of someone who has nothing to hide and nothing to prove. You're Draco's father? Yes, Lucius said. He seems decent. Harry glanced at Draco, who was staring at him with an expression that had lost its rehearsed quality entirely. The Malfoy family has a Wizengamot seat. You'll probably be hearing from Sharpfong soon. Procedurally. He said it the way you'd mention the weather, as a fact, not a threat. I filed a standard review request for all Wizengamot voting records from 1982 to present. It's a normal part of estate management when you're catching up on a decade of missed filings. The temperature dropped another degree. Lucius Malfoy had not become what he was by being readable in difficult moments. His expression remained composed. But his hand shifted on the silver cane, just slightly, and Draco caught it. Harry saw him catch it, and something uncertain moved through the boy's face. Of course, Lucius said. The Wizengamot operates with complete transparency. Any review will be welcome. He looked at Draco. Come. We'll have your measurements taken at Twilfit and Tattings. Draco stepped off the fitting stool. He pulled his robe back on. He looked at Harry once more, and this time the look was different from the first one, less inventory, more question. Then he followed his father out. The bell rang. The door closed. Madame Malkin let out a breath she'd been holding. Well, she said, in a tone that contained a complete editorial. She resumed measuring. Standard Hogwarts kit, then, love. 6 robes, we do them in the Hogwarts standard with the lining charm, they last 3 years before you need new ones. 8, Harry said. And if you have anything in house colors I'll take 4 extra once I know which house. She smiled, the way craftspeople smile when a client actually respects the work. I'll have them ready by end of day. One of our delivery owls can bring them to Hogwarts for September 1st if you're not coming back before then. He walked out of Madame Malkin's 40 minutes later with a receipt, a fitting card, and the distinct awareness that the news was already moving through Diagon Alley. He could feel it the way you feel weather changing, not in any single thing, but in the accumulation of small signals. A witch who stopped too quickly when she saw him. 2 wizards in low conversation whose eyes tracked him and then looked away. A boy, maybe 14, who tugged his mother's sleeve and pointed until she pulled his hand down. How long before it's general knowledge? Harry asked Sharpfong. It became general knowledge approximately 45 minutes ago when the Wizengamot registry received our filing notification. She didn't look up from the list she was annotating as they walked. The ministry owls their senior members within an hour of any sovereignty-adjacent document being filed. You should know that. She glanced at him sideways. You should also know that Lucius Malfoy will be on the floor to 3 people before he reaches the apparition point. What 3 people? The ones who benefited most from the throne being empty. She closed the annotation and tucked it away. And from the Potter estate being unmanaged. Harry thought about the voting records. Sharpfong, how did Malfoy vote on the Death Eater trials after Voldemort fell? The ones that were held in 1981. Sharpfang's walk did not break. Her expression did not change. That information, she said, is in the sealed Wizengamot records that your estate review has formally requested. I expect to have access within 7 days. A pause. I have, however, been practicing law for 43 years, and I am familiar with the general history of those proceedings. Were they real? The trials? Some of them. And Malfoy? He claimed the Imperius Curse. She said it like a judge reading a verdict she found procedurally valid and personally unconvincing. The case was closed without full evidentiary review. Another pause, shorter. That is also in the records I've requested. Harry bought his books from Flourish and Blots, the standard Hogwarts list and 6 additional texts that Sharpfong noted he didn't need and that he bought anyway, because he'd grown up in a house where books were things other people had and he still felt a specific hunger around them that he suspected would take a long time to satisfy. He got his potion ingredients and his brass scales and his telescope and his cauldron from the apothecary on the main street, and all of it was loaded into his expanded satchel with room to spare. The thing that happened outside Flourish and Blots was the thing he hadn't planned for. He was coming out with his stack of additional books and a girl was going in, and they nearly collided on the step. She caught her own book before it fell, which suggested good reflexes, and then looked up and said, "Sorry," in the automatic way of someone who apologizes before they've assessed the situation and would like to reassess it now. She was his age. Brown hair pulled back badly, large brown eyes, a Hogwarts supply list in her hand that she'd been annotating with a Muggle ballpoint pen, which was either practical or rebellious depending on how you looked at it. She looked at Harry. Then at the books he was carrying. Then at his supply list, which was visible under his arm, where he'd tucked it. "That's not all on the first-year list," she said. "No," he agreed. "Magical theory is," she said, pointing at the spine of one of his books, "but advanced runic systems isn't. That's third year at earliest. Are you first year?" "Yes," Harry said. "Are you?" "Yes." "Hermione Granger." She put her hand out with the decisive energy of someone who decided that the fastest path forward was introductions. "I'm Muggle-born, so I've been reading ahead. Quite a lot ahead, actually. My parents are outside, they were a bit overwhelmed by the leaky cauldron." She glanced at the shop and then back at him with the directness of someone who treats social interaction as a problem to be engaged with rather than one to be navigated around. "You're Harry Potter." "Yes. I've read about you. In Hogwarts, A History and in the Rise and Fall of the Dark Arts. The accounts are contradictory on several points. I made a list." She paused. "Sorry, that's probably a strange thing to say." "Not particularly," Harry said, and found that he meant it. She looked at him with a reassessment that was visible and interesting. He suspected most people, when she told them she'd made a list of contradictions in their historical accounts, responded with some version of social discomfort. "The books are contradictory because the people who wrote them didn't have access to primary sources," Harry said. "The primary sources are a bit more interesting." "Primary sources like what?" He thought about the letters in his satchel. About the Slytherin Vault founder's note, which he'd read 4 more times this morning. About the Hogwarts letter describing a school as if it were just a school, and the other letter describing what was underneath it. "Like the ones I found yesterday," he said. "Directly from the relevant parties." Hermione Granger's eyes went wide. Not with the starstruck quality that some people's eyes went wide with around him, he was already learning to recognize that look and did not enjoy it, but with the specific, urgent wideness of someone who has just discovered there's a primary source they haven't read. "Which relevant parties?" she said. "Come have tea," Harry said, "and I'll tell you." She looked back at the bookshop, then at her parents through the window, a tall man and a woman, both with the slight bewildered patience of people trying to be supportive about their daughter's extraordinary choices, and then back at Harry. "My parents should come too. They'll worry." "Of course." The 4 of them ended up in Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor, which was directly across from Flourish and Blots and had good sight lines up the main alley and a very solid Sunday menu. Sharpfang excused herself for her other errands with a look that said she'd be back in an hour and that Harry should not create additional legal complexity in her absence. Hermione's parents, Richard and Helen Granger, dentists, both with the alert practical intelligence their daughter had clearly inherited, were charming and absolutely out of their depth in the best possible way. Richard Granger shook Harry's hand and immediately began asking questions about the monetary system, because the galleon conversion rate he'd been given at the exchange window had not made sense to him and he wanted to verify it. Harry didn't actually know the conversion rate, but he told Richard that Gringotts published an official one and wrote down Ragnarok's contact card for him, which made Richard Granger visibly relax by about 40%. Hermione, once she had an ice cream in front of her and had assessed the table as a safe space for intellectual conversation, said, "Okay. Primary sources. Harry told her about the Gringotts letter. About the inheritance test. Not all of it, he didn't know her yet, and there were things in those documents that belonged to him before they belonged to anyone else, but enough. Enough for her to understand the shape of what had happened. He told her about the Slytherin founder's letter. About the note on the other chamber. She listened without interrupting, which was itself remarkable. Her ice cream melted slightly because she forgot about it. The 4 founders left a consolidated body of knowledge specifically accessible to the heir of all 8 houses, she said, when he'd finished. That's, the implications for magical history alone, she caught herself. Sorry. What do you think they found? The thing beneath Hogwarts? I don't know yet. I need to get to the school before I can find out. He paused. But the letter said the Ministry and the Wizengamot were both built on top of it, not literally, but structurally. Like whatever they found became the foundation that everything else got built over. He watched her face while she processed it. The letter also said the founders didn't split over blood purity. I know, Hermione said, immediately. I thought that was strange when I read it. The historical account in Hogwarts, a history is very thin on the actual reason for the split. It gives Slytherin's position on Muggleborns as the primary cause, but there's no primary source cited. It's all secondary and tertiary accounts. She looked at him. Who has the primary sources normally? Gringotts, Harry said. And the 8 houses. He paused. Which are mine? Hermione sat back. She was putting pieces together, and he could actually watch it happening, the connections forming in real time behind her eyes. Helen Granger was watching her daughter with the fond exasperation of a parent who recognizes a person being overtaken by an idea. We're going to Hogwarts on the same train, Hermione said. It wasn't a question. September 1st, Harry agreed. We should talk more on the train. She picked up her ice cream with the energy of someone who has decided on a course of action and is now free to focus on peripheral things. I have a lot of questions. I imagine, Harry said. Richard Granger leaned over. Are all 11-year-olds in this world like this, or is it specifically these 2? I couldn't say, Harry said, honestly. I only met her 20 minutes ago. Richard laughed, and Harry found, with a slight surprise that quickly settled into something warmer, that he laughed too. Ollivander's was at the end of the alley, narrow and dusty and stacked floor to ceiling with thin boxes in their thousands, and it had the precise atmosphere of a place that knew it was important and didn't need to perform the fact. The shop was quiet when Harry pushed open the door. The bell was very small. The inside was larger than the outside suggested. Garrick Ollivander emerged from between 2 stacks of shelves with the silver-eyed, cloud-haired gravity of someone who'd been measuring the world in wand lengths for longer than most wizards had been alive. He looked at Harry the way an astronomer looks at a star that's doing something unexpected. Harry Potter, he said. He said it as if the name had a particular resonance he'd been listening for. I wondered when you'd come. I expected you sooner, actually. Last week perhaps. I had some administrative things to sort out first, Harry said. Ollivander's eyes moved to the satchel, noting it with the precision of someone who recognizes a Gringotts document bag and has drawn a conclusion. Yes, he said. I imagine you did. He came closer, peering at Harry's face, at his hands, at some quality Harry couldn't identify. Your father, James Potter, 11 inches, mahogany, pliable. Good for transfiguration. Your mother, he paused, and his voice shifted, your mother, Lily Evans, 10 1/4 inches, willow, swishy. Excellent for charms. He had the specific stillness of someone holding something carefully. She was extraordinary, your mother. Her magical core had a signature I'd never measured before and haven't since. Old, I said to her. Very, very old. She laughed. She said she was Muggle-born. He looked at Harry. She wasn't, was she? She was at least Emery's line, Harry said. Ollivander went extremely still. Emery's, he said, in a voice that was almost a whisper. On her mother's side. She found out a few years before she died. Harry watched the old wandmaker's face. Is that significant for wand lore? Ollivander turned and went rapidly between two shelves without answering, which was itself an answer. Harry heard him moving, muttering, the quick efficient sounds of someone working from memory. He came back with 3 boxes, set them on the counter, opened the first one. Try this. 11 inches, holly, phoenix feather. The wand felt warm the moment Harry touched it. Not warm like proximity to a fire, but warm like something recognizing something, like a word you've always known in a language you've just started to speak. He lifted it, and the air in the shop shivered and the small collection of objects on Ollivander's shelves trembled, and a stream of gold and red sparks shot from the tip and spiraled up to the ceiling and fell like a slow, small firework. Ollivander stared. That was immediate, he said. Remarkable. I've never had a match on the first wand. He took it back gently. Inspected it. Put it down. Picked it up again. Harry waited. The phoenix who gave the feather for this wand gave only one other feather, Ollivander said, slowly. The other feather is in the wand of the wizard who gave you that scar. Harry touched the lightning bolt on his forehead. He'd known it was there his whole life and given it roughly the same thought you give a birthmark, background noise. Brothers, Ollivander said. These wands are brothers. The phoenix was Fawkes. He belongs to Albus Dumbledore. He looked at Harry with those silver eyes. In all my years, I would have said this was significant. I would have said this was meaningful, fated, connected to the narrative of your conflict with the Dark Lord. But? Harry said. Ollivander's eyes dropped to the satchel again. Then came back up. But you are not walking into this shop as a boy who carries a fate, he said, quietly. You are walking in as someone who was already here before the wand chose him. The wand chose correctly. But I find I cannot say it chose prophetically in the way I'd have meant it last week. He paused. Does that make sense? Yes, Harry said. It means the wand suits me. Not that I'm defined by the connection. Precisely. Ollivander said it with the relief of someone who'd been worried about how to put it. He wrapped the wand in its box. 11 inches, holly, phoenix feather. Reasonably supple. The holly is significant, a wood of protection in combat, of someone who stands between. He handed it over. But Mr. Potter, the Emery's lineage you mentioned. He hesitated. A wand of that family's making would be, there is no such wand in any shop in Britain, to my knowledge. The Emery's magical tradition didn't work with wood and core. It worked with, he stopped. With what? Ollivander shook his head, very slowly. Come back, he said. When you've been at Hogwarts a year. Come back and tell me what you found. He looked at the satchel. I think by then the conversation will be considerably more interesting. Harry paid for the wand. He'd had Sharpfong set up a drawing account from the main Potter vault that worked through a Gringotts card, and stepped back out into the late afternoon light of Diagon Alley. Sharpfong was waiting 3 shops down, upright and patient as a lamppost. Done, Harry said. Good. She fell into step beside him. I've sent the formal Wisengamot notification from the alley's public floor room. The ministry will have it by close of business today. She glanced at him. Cornelius Fudge has already sent 2 owls to Gringotts asking for clarification. I've responded that clarification is available in the filed documents and that the Gringotts legal team is not available to summarize documentation for parties who should have read it the first time. Harry looked at her sideways. Did you actually send that? In more formal language. The corners of her mouth did something. The meaning was identical. He laughed. She glanced at him with that amber-eyed precision. There will be pressure, she said, and her tone dropped into something that was not a warning so much as a professional briefing. People will come. They will claim friendship with your parents, or they will claim concern for your welfare, or they will come with legal challenges attempting to dispute the sovereignty claim. Some will come with all three. She stopped walking and looked at him directly. You are 11 years old and you hold the oldest legal instrument in magical Britain. People who have spent 30 years in a room where that chair was empty are not comfortable with it being occupied. Even passively. I know, Harry said. You know abstractly. You will shortly know concretely. Good. He shifted the satchel on his shoulder. I'd rather know concretely. The afternoon was turning golden and the alley was filling with the end-of-business rush, witches and wizards collecting last purchases, owls overhead heading to their post-destinations. Harry stood in the middle of it and looked up the cobbled length of the street, the robes, the wands, the cauldrons, the children pointing at ice cream and parents looking at price lists and somewhere a wireless playing something jazzy and entirely too cheerful for the level of political tension currently radiating from the Gringotts building 300 meters away. This was his world. It had not been particularly kind to him so far. It had misfiled his vaults, mislabeled his history, misplaced his home, and installed him in a cupboard under a staircase for a decade while telling itself it was doing him a favor. He intended to be the most polite corrective force it had ever encountered. Sharp Fong, he said. Lord Potter. When the ministry sends someone to talk to me before September 1st, and they will, we both know they will, I want Ragnarok present, I want you present, and I want to have read every document in the estate files before the meeting. He paused. And I want to have found out exactly what Lucius Malfoy was actually doing during the Death Eater years before he's allowed to sit in the same room as me. Sharpfang's version of approval was economical. A single nod, very precise. I'll have the files ready by Thursday, she said. They walked back up Diagon Alley as the sun dropped behind the rooftops, and the gold light followed them all the way to the leaky cauldron, and Harry didn't look back at that either. He was already thinking about September. Chapter 3, What the Hat Knows. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at exactly 11 o'clock on the 1st of September, and Harry was on it 20 minutes early. He'd learned from a decade of living with the Dursleys that the best way to navigate spaces where you weren't entirely sure of the rules was to arrive before everyone else and watch how the space worked. Platform 9 3/4 was no different from any other new place in that regard, except that it smelled of coal smoke and magic and had a scarlet steam engine idling at its length that looked exactly as dramatic as a scarlet steam engine at the head of a castle-bound train should. He found a compartment near the middle of the train, stowed his trunk with the ease of the extension charm Sharp Fong had had a Gringotts associate perform on it, everything he owned fit now, which was practically speaking the first time in his life he'd had that luxury, and sat by the window with a book he wasn't really reading and watched the platform fill up. The ministry had, as predicted, sent someone before September 1st. Two someones, actually, a fussy undersecretary named Weasley who'd been embarrassed and apologetic and made it clear that Minister Fudge was very interested in meeting Lord Potter at his earliest convenience, and a second official whose robes were too formal for a house call and who had spent the entire meeting looking at Harry the way you look at a piece of legislation you hadn't expected to encounter at 11 in the morning. Sharp Fong had handled most of the talking. Harry had answered 3 questions directly and referred everything else to his legal team, which he'd enjoyed more than he probably should have. The undersecretary had left looking relieved. The second official had left looking unhappy, which meant he'd been sent to get something and hadn't gotten it. The ministry would be back. He knew that. But September was September, and the Hogwarts Express was leaving, and there were more important things right now than Cornelius Fudge's schedule. Hermione Granger appeared in the compartment doorway at 10:50, dragging a trunk that was clearly overloaded with books, and said, "I thought you might be in here," in a tone that meant she'd actually checked 4 other compartments first and was not admitting to this. "Sit down," Harry said. "We can charm the trunk onto the rack." "I can manage," she began, and then the trunk slid neatly onto the luggage rack under a charm Harry applied with the ease of someone who'd been practicing wand movements in the spare bedroom at Privet Drive every evening for the past month. She looked at him. "Did they teach you that already?" "I taught myself. It's in the Standard Book of Spells, Chapter 3. I'm on Chapter 7, she said, sitting down with the automatic competitiveness of someone who hadn't meant to make it a competition but genuinely couldn't help it. Chapter 3 only covers object levitation. I improvised the directional component. She pulled out her own copy of the Standard Book of Spells, turned to Chapter 3, and read the page with the focused energy of someone who refuses to be beaten by an improvisation they should have thought of. Harry watched her with the quiet pleasure of someone who has realized they've found a person who operates at a similar frequency. The train began to move at 11 exactly. At 10 past 11, the compartment door slid open again and a round-faced boy put his head in with the apologetic energy of someone who expects to be turned away. He had a toad in both hands, a fat, disconsolate toad that seemed to be contemplating its life choices. "Sorry," he said. "Have you seen a toad?" "Well, I had a toad, I have him, I found him, but I lost him and then found him again and I was wondering if he'd been in here." He registered that this was not making complete sense and stopped. "He wasn't," Harry said, "but sit down if you want. There's room." The boy looked surprised in the specific way of someone who expected rejection and received an invitation and hasn't quite recategorized the situation. He sat. The toad settled into his lap with resignation. "Neville Longbottom," he said. "Harry Potter." "Hermione Granger." Hermione looked up briefly from her book, said hello, and looked back down. Neville registered Harry's name with a flicker of recognition that he controlled quickly, better than most adults had managed, and then said, "I know who you are. Our families knew each other, I think. My gran mentioned your parents." "Good things?" Harry said. Neville considered this with the honesty of someone who doesn't do automatic reassurance. "She said your father was reckless and brilliant and that your mother was the most powerful which she'd seen since." He stopped. "Well, Gran doesn't finish that sentence. But she says it like it's a very long list." "I'm starting to understand why," Harry said. The toad shifted. Neville stroked it absently. He had hands that looked like they belonged to someone who spent time in gardens, blunt-fingered, careful, with a trace of soil under one nail that he hadn't entirely got clean. Harry noticed things like that. "You went to Gringotts," Neville said. It wasn't a question. "Before school. Gran got a notification, the Wisengamot one. About the sovereignty claim." He paused. "She cried." Harry looked at him. "Good tears," Neville clarified, quickly. "She's on the traditionalist side of Wisengamot politics. She said she'd been waiting for someone to file that claim since before I was born." He stroked the toad again. "She wanted me to tell you, if I met you, that the Longbottom family votes with the throne. However you need it." The train was running through the outer suburbs now, the platform and the station gone, London bleeding into the green-edged countryside. Harry sat with that for a moment. The Longbottom family votes with the throne. He thought about Sharpfang's list of families, the ones she'd started building, the ones who'd been uncomfortable with the empty throne seat, and the ones who'd quietly preferred it empty. "Tell your gran thank you," Harry said. "And tell her I'll be in touch through proper channels before the end of term." Neville nodded, with the serious quiet of someone who had just been entrusted with a message and intended to deliver it correctly. Then the toad made a particularly mournful sound and Neville looked down at it and said, "He hates travel," in a voice so full of affectionate resignation that Harry found himself grinning. "What's his name?" "Trevor. Classic toad name." "I know. He came with it. From my great-uncle Algy. I didn't feel I could change it." Neville looked up. "He pushed me out a window once, my great-uncle. To see if I'd do magic. I bounced." He said this without particular drama, as a fact among facts. "I was 8. There was a beat." "Did it work?" Harry asked. I bounced," Neville said. "Is that magic or physics?" "Probably both," Hermione said, without looking up. They were quiet for a moment in the comfortable way of three people who have determined they're going to get along. The journey went quickly after that. Hermione quizzed them both on the Hogwarts curriculum, which Harry engaged with fully and Neville engaged with cautiously, as someone who has been told he's not particularly talented and has not yet had reason to disbelieve it. Harry noticed how Neville answered questions, carefully, slowly, hedging with I think and maybe before giving answers that were, more often than not, correct. He made a note of it. Somewhere past Birmingham, Ron Weasley stuck his head in looking for a seat, saw that the compartment was full, and moved on. Two girls came by and stayed for a while, Lavender Brown and Parvati Patil, both already Hogwarts letter-informed and excited in the unguarded way of children who haven't yet learned to moderate their enthusiasm. They wanted to know about Harry. Harry answered a few questions, deflected the stranger ones, and Hermione at one point simply handed Lavender a book on wizarding history and said, "This covers the factual record," in a tone that was helpful rather than dismissive, even if the line was narrow. At some point the countryside went wild and dark and Scottish and the Hogwarts Express rounded a bend and there it was, castle-shaped against the sky, towers lit and stacked against the dark like a geological formation that had decided architecture was a reasonable personal project. Harry had the window and he didn't move for a long moment. "That's ours," Neville said, quietly, from beside him. "Yes," Harry said. The boats across the lake were Hagrid's doing, and Hagrid himself was enormous and warm and possessed of the specific charisma of someone who genuinely loves what they're talking about, which in this case was Hogwarts and the boats and the sky and the general extraordinary fact of being alive. Harry liked him immediately and unreservedly. He filed Hagrid under people who are exactly what they appear to be, which was a category he was already building carefully. The castle at close range was something else entirely. Harry had been in old buildings before, a church on a school trip once, which had smelled of stone and time, but Hogwarts had something those places didn't have, a pressure in the air like a sound just below hearing, a sense of the building being not just old but aware. He'd grown up having accidental magic happen around him all his life. He'd learned to feel magic the way you learn to feel temperature, not consciously, but in the body, before the brain catches up. The castle knew something was in the courtyard that hadn't been here before. He felt it when he walked through the doors. It was subtle, a deepening in the quality of the ambient magic, like a chord gaining a new note. No one else seemed to notice. Professor McGonagall noticed him, he thought, or noticed something, because her eyes found him in the group with a precision that wasn't simply recognition and stayed there a half-second longer than necessary before moving on. She was exactly what he'd imagined from every book and document he'd read that mentioned her, straight-backed, precise, clearly intelligent behind the severity, and possessed of the kind of authority that doesn't need to announce itself. He decided he respected her before she said a word. The entrance hall. The waiting. The other first years clustering in the way of people navigating an overwhelming first day. He stayed near Hermione and Neville and kept relatively quiet, which some people interpreted as nerves. It wasn't nerves. He was listening to the castle. The doors to the great hall opened. The hall was everything, the long tables, the floating candles, the ceiling that Hermione leaned over to tell Neville was bewitched to reflect the sky outside, which it was, and which was currently a deep and specific October in Scotland shade of moving cloud. For tables, for house colors, 1,000 students in an ascending roar of conversation that dropped when the first years walked in. Harry had been told it would go quiet. He'd been told people would look. He hadn't been told how large quiet could feel in a room with 1,000 people in it. He walked to the front without changing his pace. The Sorting Hat sat on a three-legged stool. It was old and patched and looked exactly like something that had been doing its job since the 10th century without once being replaced, and when it opened its brim and began its song, Harry listened to every word with more attention than anyone else in the room was paying to it. The song was the usual orientation, for houses, for founders, for sets of qualities, but in the last verse there was a line that made the back of his neck prickle, and should the heir of all 4 houses come one day to sit before me, then shall I speak what I have guarded through 1,000 years of keeping. The song ended. The great hall applauded. Harry looked at Hermione, who was looking at him with wide eyes that confirmed she'd caught the same verse. McGonagall began calling names. They went alphabetically, which meant Hermione went early and came back to the stool wearing Gryffindor colors with an expression of profound satisfaction. Neville was called. He sat for a long time before the hat called Gryffindor, and when he came to the Gryffindor table he sat down very carefully, as if the chair might change its mind. Potter, Harry. The great hall went back to that large, specific quiet. Harry sat on the stool. McGonagall put the hat on his head. It dropped over his eyes and the world went slightly golden, and the hat, which was not a voice exactly, more like thought speaking to thought, said, "Well. Well, well, well." Harry waited. "I have been waiting for you for a considerable time," the hat said. "A very considerable time. Since before you were born, if we're being specific. Since the year the throne went empty and I was asked to watch for its eventual claimant." A pause. "Godric asked me." He was thoughtful that way. Also quite specific about how I should handle the announcement. What announcement? Harry thought. "The one I'm about to make," the hat said. "You have earned every house, technically speaking. Gryffindor's courage, absolutely present. Ravenclaw's intellect, substantial. Hufflepuff's loyalty, the rarest kind, the kind that's earned rather than defaulted to. Slytherin's ambition and strategic intelligence, more than you know yet." A pause. "But you are heir to all four, and the heir of all four does not belong in any one house. You belong to the school." That's going to confuse a lot of people, Harry thought. Yes, the hat agreed, with what was identifiably dry amusement for an 1100-year-old hat. "It rather will. Are you prepared for that?" "I've been confusing people since yesterday morning," Harry thought. "I'm getting comfortable with it." "Good," said the hat. "Then listen, there is a chamber beneath this school. Accessible from the fourth-floor corridor, behind the tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy, down 2 levels. The founders built it before they built the school. The school was built to protect it. It will respond to you because it recognizes what you carry." A pause. "Find it before the solstice." "Why before the solstice?" "Because something else is already looking for it," the hat said. "And it has a head start." Then it straightened on his head and announced, in a voice that filled every corner of the great hall and bounced off the enchanted ceiling and settled into the silence like a stone into still water, "Hogwarts. Not a house. The school." The silence lasted a full 4 seconds. 4 seconds in a hall of 1,000 students was a geological age. Then the noise came back in a wave, and it was not polite applause, it was the particular volume of a crowd that has just witnessed something unprecedented and has not yet agreed on how to feel about it. Harry took the hat off, handed it back to a McGonagall who was staring at him with an expression he couldn't fully categorize, something between professional composure and profound surprise, and stepped off the stool. He walked to the Gryffindor table. He sat down next to Hermione and Neville, because he knew them and liked them and because his magic seemed to have opinions about proximity. The hat hadn't assigned him a house, but the school had to put him somewhere for dormitory purposes, and he suspected that argument would be Dumbledore's problem to sort out. Speaking of whom? Harry looked up the long table to the staff table, where Albus Dumbledore sat in the central chair with the particular stillness of a man who has just heard something unexpected and is processing it with the speed of a very good mind. Blue eyes behind half-moon glasses, white beard, elaborate robes, and an expression that was thoughtful and complex and, Harry thought, not entirely surprised. Not entirely surprised. Which meant he'd known this was a possibility. He'd known, and he hadn't mentioned it. Harry held that thought, and then let it go for now. The feast appeared. The great hall erupted back into itself. Neville looked at Harry with wide eyes and Trevor in his pocket. He'd somehow got the toad through the boat ride and the entrance ceremony without losing him, and said, did you? Yes, Harry said. Okay, Neville said, and accepted a plate of roast potatoes with the stoicism of someone who has decided to simply keep moving. Hermione leaned in. The verse, she said, quietly. In the Hat's song. Should the heir of all four houses, it knew. It's been waiting, Harry said. Since the founders. What did it say to you? When it was on your head? Chamber, Harry said. 4th floor. Behind the Barnabas tapestry. Down 2 levels. Before the winter solstice. Hermione's eyes went calculating. The solstice is December 21st. That's 3.5 months. Why the solstice? Something else is looking for it. Faster than us. Hermione didn't ask who something else was. She looked at her plate. Looked at the staff table. Looked back at Harry. Quirrell, she said, quietly. The defense against the dark arts teacher. He's been at Gringotts 3 times this summer according to the records your advocate published. She published a general notification of your estate review, and the goblin record of unusual activity near your sealed vaults includes 3 separate access attempts in August. All declined. All from a wizard with a registration matching Quirinus Quirrell. Harry looked at the defense teacher. Turban, nervous manner, a stutter that seemed slightly performative in the way of stutters that have been practiced rather than developed. He was looking at his plate with the careful attention of someone who is not looking at Harry Potter. How do you know about Gringotts access attempts? I read everything Sharpfong filed when it became public record, Hermione said, with the complete lack of apology of someone who considers reading available information to be simply what you do. She published a summary of the estate review findings in the Wisengamot Public Register. I got a copy at Flourish and Blots. Harry looked at her. When? The day after Diagon Alley. I went back. She paused. I asked my parents to take me. I told them it was for research. It was for research. Yes, but they had opinions about the frequency of the research. She picked up her fork. Quirrell tried to access something in your family's secured registry. That's significant. Very, Harry agreed. Down the table, Percy Weasley, a 5th-year prefect who'd introduced himself with the energy of someone who considers prefect status a personal achievement of civilizational significance, was explaining to a first-year that what had just happened with the sorting was highly irregular and that he would be looking into the relevant statutes. Harry caught the eye of the twin Weasleys, who were sitting across from each other and grinning with the synchronized energy of people who have just decided they like someone very much. Oi, Potter, said the one on the left. Fred, said the other one. George. We've been sorted here 4 years, Fred said. Never heard it do that, George agreed. You're either very impressive, Fred said. Or the hat's lost it, George said. Could be both, they said together. Harry grinned. Probably both, he agreed, which was the correct answer, and the twins laughed. Dumbledore spoke to him after the feast. Not in a dramatic, summoned to the headmaster's office way. Harry had been watching for that particular approach, the patriarchal one, the come and sit and let me explain things to you, and it didn't come. Instead, as the students were filing out of the Great Hall, Dumbledore simply fell into step beside him in the easy way of someone who doesn't need to create an occasion. A remarkable evening, he said. Yes, Harry said. I should like to speak with you, Harry, when you've settled in. Perhaps this weekend? His voice was warm, unhurried, carrying the quality of a man who has many conversations and considers each one important. There are things I should tell you. About your parents, about your history. I've had the Gringotts assessment, Harry said. He said it without any edge. Informational. I've read my father's letter and my mother's letter. I have the full property inventory and the estate documents through Sharpfong. He paused. Is there something you wanted to tell me that isn't covered by those? A brief silence. Very brief, but present. The letters from your parents, Dumbledore said, gently. I wasn't aware those had been preserved. Gringotts sealed them in 1981 when someone tried to access the estate file before my 11th birthday. Harry was still walking, and Dumbledore was still beside him, and the conversation had the strange quality of two people moving at the same pace in slightly different directions. Do you know who tried to access it? I'm afraid I don't. Sharpfang is looking into it, Harry said. He glanced sideways and up, because Dumbledore was tall and Harry was 11. She's thorough. She has a formidable reputation. A pause. Harry, I want you to know that everything I've done has been in your interest. Sometimes the best way to protect someone is, to not tell them things, Harry said. I know. My dad wrote about that approach. He said it without cruelty. He meant it as an observation. He didn't agree with it either. Another silence, longer this time. They'd reached the point in the corridor where it branched, and Dumbledore's path went toward the gargoyle and his office, and Harry's path went toward wherever the Hogwarts sorted students were being housed. The invisibility cloak, Harry said, before they separated. Sharpfang's letter requested it back or a formal transfer document. If you have it, she'll need one or the other before the end of term. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment with those extraordinarily blue eyes. Not unkindly. With something that might have been assessment and might have been, underneath the professional gravity, a small surprised degree of respect. I'll be in touch with Sharpfang, he said. Thank you, Harry said. He turned and walked in the other direction. The castle moved around him with its old, warm, aware quality, and he had the distinct sense that the building registered his presence and was content about it, the way a house feels when the right people come home. McGonagall caught up with him at the foot of the first staircase. Mr. Potter, she said. She had a list in her hand. Your dormitory arrangements. Given the nature of your sorting, the headmaster and I have agreed that you will be assigned a small private room adjoining the Gryffindor Tower. You'll have access to the common room and all Gryffindor facilities. This is consistent with historical precedent for students of dual or multiple house heritage, of which you are, the most extreme case on record. Thank you, Professor. You will also have access to the Hogwarts library without the standard first-year restricted section limitations, as of your formal recognition as heir to the 4 founding houses. She said this with the brevity of someone reading off items from a list and not adding editorial. This is not standard and I would ask that you not advertise it. Of course. She started to turn. Then stopped. Turned back. Your mother, she said, and her voice changed, very slightly, but enough. I taught her. For 6 years. She was the most naturally gifted transfiguration student I ever had. She paused. I was told she was Muggle-born. I accepted that. I shouldn't have, not that it would have changed how I taught her, but because accepting the incomplete story made me lazy about the full one. She looked at Harry. I don't intend to do that again. He held her gaze. I'll tell you what I know, he said. When I know more. She nodded, once, precise as everything else about her, and left. His room was small and high up and had a window that looked northeast over the lake and a desk that was already stacked with his transferred books and a bed that was wider than anything he'd slept in at Privet Drive. He sat on it for a moment, feeling the quality of the silence, castle silence, old and deep, with the occasional distant sound of students settling into dormitories and the creak of stone doing what stone does when it's been standing for 1,000 years. He opened his notebook and wrote, Barnabas the Barmy Tapestry, 4th floor. Down 2 levels. Before the solstice. Quirrell, Gringotts access attempts August, declined. Find out what he was looking for specifically. Dumbledore, cloak to be returned. Watch what he does next. Longbottom, family votes with the throne. Solid. Granger, resource, ally, possibly the most useful person in the school. He put the notebook down and looked out the window at the dark lake. Somewhere out there, something large moved below the surface, a brief displacement of the reflected moonlight, and was gone. He thought about the hat's warning. Something else is already looking for it. And it has a head start. He thought about Quirrell's stutter that didn't quite sit right. About the turban, which was fashionable in some circles but which Quirrell had been wearing in August, in London, when the weather had been 30 degrees and no one else was. He thought about the line from Voldemort's wand being the brother of his. He lay back on the bed and looked at the ceiling of his first real room in a real home. Tomorrow was potions. He'd read Snape's published academic papers over the summer. There were 6 of them, available through the magical academic index Sharp Fong had given him access to, and they were extraordinary. Dense and precise and written with the particular authority of someone who knows more about a subject than they've put on the page. He was looking forward to potions the way he was looking forward to everything at Hogwarts, with the appetite of someone who has been waiting a long time to eat. But first, there was one more thing. He got up, took the Slytherin founder's letter from his satchel, and read it again. Find the chamber first. Not the one everyone talks about. The other one. The hat had given him the location. The letter had given him the reason. Between the two of them, the picture was becoming clearer. He wrote one more line in the notebook: start mapping the 4th floor on the first possible night. He put the notebook away. He picked up magical theory, which was technically on the first-year curriculum, and opened it to a chapter that most first years would take a semester to reach. He read for an hour and a half. He wasn't tired. He'd slept well at Privet Drive. He'd slept well because something had resolved, the night of the Gringotts letter, some old knot in his chest that had been there so long he'd stopped feeling it as a knot and just felt it as part of himself. And now it was gone, and in its place was this. This appetite. This clean, particular aliveness. He was at Hogwarts. He had 8 houses and a dormant throne and a founding-era letter pointing him toward a chamber that the entire wizarding world had forgotten existed. He had a possible Voldemort-adjacent teacher 2 floors below him and a legal advocate who made senior ministry officials cry and parents who had left him letters that he was still finding new things in every time he read them. He closed magical theory. He turned off the lamp. And in the good dark of a room that was his, in a castle that knew he was there, Harry Potter went to sleep thinking about 4th-floor tapestries. The first potions class was at 9 o'clock. He arrived 2 minutes early, which put him ahead of most of the class and directly behind only Hermione, who had arrived 5 minutes early and taken the second-row seat that offered the best angle to both the blackboard and the demonstration table. She had her ingredients pre-sorted and her notes already dated. He sat next to her. Neville came in looking slightly nervous, sat on Harry's other side, and arranged his ingredients with the careful attention of someone who has been told he is bad at something and wants to at least start organized. Snape arrived without preamble, robes moving with the self-possessed efficiency of someone who considers theatrical entrances to be beneath them, which somehow made his entrances more theatrical than if he tried. He stood at the front of the classroom, ran his eyes over the students, and gave the speech about the subtle science and exact art of potion-making that was, Harry thought, actually a very good speech, the kind that meant it. The man was brilliant. The disdain for mediocrity in every sentence was earned rather than affected. Then his eyes found Harry and stayed there. Potter, he said. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? It was a trap, obviously. An entrance exam disguised as a question, delivered to the student most people would expect to be too famous to have bothered with preparation. Draught of living death, Harry said. One of the most powerful sleeping potions known. The combination of asphodel, which is associated in old magic with grief and the afterlife, and wormwood, which has soporific properties in concentrated infusion, creates a compound that suppresses vital function to near dormancy. There's a variation in most Patendi potions that adjusts the wormwood concentration to create a reversible version, though the counter potion requirements are specific to the individual. Silence. Snape's expression had not changed. It had done something far more interesting, which was remained precisely the same while something shifted behind it. Where would you look, he said, after a moment, if I asked you to find me a bezoar? Stomach of a goat, Harry said. It's a calcified mass formed in the digestive system. Antidote to most poisons. The quality varies with the animal's diet. Goats that have eaten significant quantities of magical herbs produce bezoars with broader antidotal properties. Gringotts has one in the Peveril Vault that's estimated to be from the 14th century, though I haven't had it tested yet. The silence was longer this time. What, Snape said, softly, is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane? They're the same plant, Harry said. Also called aconite. The name differs by regional tradition. Monkshood is the English herbalist name, wolfsbane is the Northern European magical tradition name, aconite is the formal taxonomic one. The magical properties are consistent across all three names. He paused. Although the older Peveril texts suggest there's a fourth name used specifically in ritual applications, but I haven't found a clear translation yet. Snape looked at him for a very long time. The classroom was the specific quiet of 30 students not breathing. 5 points to Hogwarts, Snape said, which came out with the constrained precision of someone working through an unusual sentence structure. He turned to the class. The rest of you might want to reconsider how thoroughly you've read your materials. He moved toward the demonstration table. Today we brew a simple calming draft. Instructions on the board. Begin. He didn't come near Harry's workstation for the rest of the class. Harry, who had been thoroughly prepared, brewed a smooth, clear calming draft that Snape lifted with 2 fingers at the end of class, held to the light and set back down without comment, which Hermione later told him was the Snape equivalent of a standing ovation. After class, in the corridor, Neville turned to him and said, "How did you know all of that?" "I read," Harry said. "I read," Neville said. "Read more," Hermione said, which was meant helpfully and landed slightly wrong, and then she corrected herself, "I mean, you knew the Bezoar. You answered it on the second question. You know more than you think." Neville looked at her. Looked at Harry. Harry nodded once, confirming it. Neville's mouth did a small uncertain thing that was on its way to becoming a smile. They walked up toward lunch. The castle moved around them, warm and old and paying attention, and Harry felt again, stronger now, after a night and a morning, the particular pressure of it. Not threatening. Expectant. Like a room waiting for the meeting to start. Something else is already looking for it, the hat had said. Harry looked at the 4th-floor corridor as they passed it on the way to the stairs. Just a corridor. Tapestry at the far end showing a lunging dancing creature and a wizard in a compromising posture. Before the solstice. He had time. But not, he thought, an unlimited amount of it. Chapter 4, What Lies Beneath. October arrived at Hogwarts the way it always did in Scotland, suddenly, and with commitment. One morning the grounds were still holding the last amber stubbornness of September, and by the next they were thoroughly November's advance work, all low cloud and aggressive wind and the loch gone from blue-grey to black. The castle responded by running its fires hotter and the staircases by shifting more frequently, as if the cold made them restless. Harry had been at Hogwarts for exactly 31 days and had spent them learning at a pace that satisfied him in the specific way that only doing something you're genuinely built for can satisfy you. Not every class was potions, which remained the highlight on the strength of Snape's particular brand of brilliant, uncompromising instruction, but every class had something in it worth extracting, and Harry extracted it with the systematic appetite he brought to everything. He'd also spent October mapping. Not officially. Not with any formal announcement or process. He simply moved through the castle the way he moved through everything, attentively, patiently, taking notes. Hogwarts, he discovered, responded to this. Corridors that should have been dead ends occasionally weren't when he came back to them. Doors that had been locked on Tuesday were occasionally not locked on Thursday. He didn't think it was the castle playing games. He thought it was the castle recognizing the person doing the exploring. His private room had become something of an operations center. The desk held 3 things: his academic notes, which were thorough and organized, his inheritance documents, which Sharpfong updated through Owl Post twice a week with the regularity of a well-run newspaper, and his personal notebook, which now had 17 pages of castle geography sketched in his neat, practical hand. He'd found the Barnabas the Barmy tapestry on his 3rd night. 4th floor, exactly where the hat had said, in a corridor that the standard Hogwarts map listed as a dead end. He'd sat in front of it for 20 minutes on that first night, looking at the idiot warlock in the tapestry trying to teach ballet to a group of trolls who were demonstrating no aptitude, and he'd run his hand along the wall beside it and felt the particular thickness in the stone that meant there was something behind it. He hadn't gone through yet. He'd wanted to know more before he went through. The hat had said the chamber would respond to him, but the hat had also said something else was looking for it, and Harry's approach to situations where something potentially dangerous was already in motion was not to charge in ignorantly. His approach was to arrive comprehensively informed. So, October. Mapping, learning, watching. The watching part was mostly Quirrell. Quirrell taught defense against the dark arts with the particular energy of a man giving a performance he finds exhausting. The stutter was inconsistent. Harry had clocked it in their first class, the way it came and went depending on what was being discussed rather than being constant the way genuine speech impediments were. When Quirrell talked about standard defensive theory, the stutter was present, emphatic, almost theatrical. When he slipped into something more specific, a particular hex, a specific dark creature's anatomy, a detail that suggested real field experience, it vanished for half a sentence before he caught himself and reapplied it. A man pretending to be less than he was. Harry knew that performance from the inside. He didn't say anything about it in class. He answered questions correctly, did the assigned exercises, and watched the turban. He'd read about Voldemort, extensively, because if you had 14 vaults of accumulated magical knowledge and a legal advocate who'd grown up during the height of the Death Eater years, you found the information relatively available, and one particular account from an academic text in the Peveril Library had described the dark magic associated with soul tethering. The kind of magic that allowed a dispersed magical consciousness to persist by attaching itself to a living host. The turban kept Quirrell's head pointing forward and away. He'd written to Sharp Fong about it in the third week of term. Her response had come back in 4 days, and the relevant section read, "The Quirrell issue is noted. I have shared your observations with Ragnarok, who will make appropriate discreet inquiries through Gringotts security channels. We advise you to take no direct action at this time. Note that the object the 3 August access attempts were directed at was your family's sealed registry of Peveril artifacts, specifically, the entry for a certain black stone, which as you know from the vault inventory is currently in your possession. The Resurrection Stone. Someone had tried 3 times to find it in your family's records before the school year even started." Harry had moved the stone from his satchel to the bottom of his Hogwarts trunk, under 3 locked protective charms he'd found in a Peveril security manual, and had not touched it since. He didn't tell Hermione about the stone specifically. He told her about the access attempts. She'd gone quiet in the way she went quiet when she was genuinely concerned rather than intellectually engaged with a problem, and then said, "We need to find the chamber before he does." "Yes," Harry agreed. "When?" "This weekend." It was Saturday night, the 14th of October, and the castle was quiet in the particular way of Saturday nights when most students had burned through their social energy at dinner and retreated to common rooms with books or games or the low-grade collective noise of people relaxing. Harry met Hermione and Neville on the 3rd floor landing at midnight. Neville had brought Trevor, who appeared to share the general consensus that this was inadvisable, and his wand, and an expression of determined willingness that Harry had come to recognize as Neville's version of courage, not the absence of fear but the decision to move despite it, which was more interesting than fearlessness. Hermione had brought a Lumos charm so practiced it came out at precisely the wattage she wanted, a notebook, and 4 pages of preliminary research on the 4th floor dead-end corridor that she'd assembled from Hogwarts, a history, 2 supplementary texts, and what she described as careful observation over 3 weeks, which Harry understood to mean she'd been mapping too, independently, and had not told him because she'd wanted to verify her findings first. He grinned when she showed him. She went slightly pink and said it wasn't about competition. "I know," he said. "You just wanted to be sure before you said anything." "Yes," she said, sounding relieved. They went up. The 4th floor corridor was genuinely quiet at this hour, the kind of quiet that suggests long practice, a place people have been unconsciously avoiding for a long time without knowing why. Harry's wand lit without speaking. He moved along the corridor with Hermione and Neville behind him and stopped at the tapestry. Up close, in wandlight, Barnabas the Barmy had the specific expression of someone who has committed to a terrible idea and is now too proud to reconsider. The trolls around him were enormous and magnificent and completely uninterested in ballet. Harry ran his hand along the wall to the right of the tapestry's frame, following the thickness he'd felt before, moving along it until, there. A section of stone, maybe 2 feet wide, that was not quite solid in the way the rest of the wall was solid. It wasn't hollow, it didn't sound hollow when he pressed it. It felt more like the stone was remembering being a door and could be reminded of this if asked correctly. He pressed his palm flat against it and thought, deliberately and clearly, I am the heir of the 4 founders of this school. I am asking to come in. It wasn't spoken. It was closer to intention than speech. But the magic in the stone, and there was magic in it, old and formal and very patient, received it, considered it for approximately 2 seconds, and then the wall opened inward on a seam so clean it hadn't been visible, revealing a staircase going down. Oh, said Hermione. The stairs were stone and went steeply down. Not roughly, they were worked smooth, each step even, the walls beside them fitted with a series of unlit sconces that came alive as they descended, one by one, a warm amber light that was clearly magical and was clearly happy to be of use after an extended dormancy. The ceiling was low for about the first flight and then opened up, and by the second flight Harry could stand fully upright and the walls were not just bare stone but carved, subtle patterns, interlocking geometric forms that shifted at the edges of his peripheral vision. Runic, Hermione breathed, touching a carved line with one careful finger. But not standard, this predates the standard system. Look at this construction, keep moving, Harry said, not unkindly. She came away from the wall with visible reluctance. The second level down opened into a corridor that ran in both directions, and the corridor opened, after about 30 feet of walking, into a chamber. It was large. Not vast in a theatrical sense, about the size of a comfortable great hall, with a ceiling that arched to a modest peak. But the quality of the space was extraordinary. 4 alcoves, one on each wall, each containing a stone chair carved directly from the rock with that same low-relief decorative work. Each chair was different, one was angular and upright, one flowing and curved, one compact and solid, one ornate and high-backed. 4 founders, 4 styles, 4 representations. In the center of the room, where a table might have been in a conventional meeting chamber, there was no table. There was a circle inlaid in the floor in 4 metals, gold, silver, copper, iron, and in the center of the circle, a flat stone basin. Not empty. The basin held a liquid that was not water but moved like it, silver blue and luminous, lit from within, throwing the arched ceiling into slow-moving reflections. That's a pensieve, Hermione said. A big one, Neville said. It was much larger than the small version Harry had seen in Ragnarok's office. It was also clearly not a standard pensieve, the standard ones held memories added by a single person. This one had a different quality, the quality of something contributed to by multiple people over time, the way a book is different from a letter. Harry stepped into the circle. The floor felt, he didn't have a word for it that wasn't synesthetic, it felt like recognition, the way a voice sounds when it calls your name correctly. He looked into the basin. The surface showed him something. Not the swirling gray of conventional memory. Something else, 4 images, simultaneously, occupying 4 quadrants of the basin's surface. In one, a map, clearly magical Britain, with lines of magical energy marked in gold across the landscape, running through and between the 8 ancient territories. In another, a diagram of something architectural, with annotations in a script that was part rune and part something older. In the third, a text, dense and clear, in early modern English he could almost read. In the fourth, a face, or not quite a face, more a pattern that suggested a face, looking up at him from the basin with the stillness of something that had been waiting for centuries for something specific to arrive, and was now looking at it. Harry looked back. The pattern spoke. Not in sound, in the same way the hat had spoken, thought to thought, but slower and more formal, the register of something that had been carefully composed rather than improvised. Heir of all. We are what the four of us chose to leave when we understood that Hogwarts would outlast us, and that the thing we found would need a guardian we could not provide ourselves. We built the school over this chamber because the school would endure. We put the knowledge in the houses because the air would need to come through all four. We gave the hat our instructions because the hat would know when the time was right. You are the time. Harry waited. There are 23 ley lines running through the magical territory of Britain. They are the foundation of every piece of magic done on this island. They predate wizards, they predate magic as practitioners understand it. Where they intersect, magic is strongest. The 8 ancient territories were established at the 8 most powerful intersection points. This was not accidental. The families who held those territories held the lines. We found this chamber at the central intersection point, the place where all 23 lines converge. It is beneath Hogwarts because we built Hogwarts here for that reason. The ministry was built later, 3 miles from the nearest major intersection, because the people who built it did not have access to the maps we left here and were using secondary surveys. The throne of magical Britain is not ceremonial. It is the functional role of the person who holds all 8 intersection points. When the throne is occupied, the ley lines are governed. When they are governed, magic across Britain is stable, accessible, and clean. When the throne is empty, a pause. When the throne is empty, the lines drift. They become accessible to manipulation. People can tap into intersection energy without oversight. People can do things with raw ley energy that the lines were never designed to permit. Harry thought about the past century of magical history. About Grindelwald. About Voldemort. 2 catastrophic dark rises in 60 years, both characterized by a quality of dark magic that the academic texts he'd read described as unusually structured, unusually powerful, suggesting systematic access to a source beyond individual magical capacity. He thought, they were tapping the ley lines. Both of them. Without a sovereign to govern access, anyone could. Correct, the pattern said. The heir of all does not simply hold legal title to 8 houses. The heir governs the lines. This is the function. The political structure, the Wisengamot seats, the sovereignty claim, these are the administrative expression of a magical reality that is older than administration. A pause. You will need to formally accept the governance of the lines before the winter solstice. On the solstice, there is a natural convergence of ley energy at this chamber. If the governance is not accepted at that convergence, something else takes it, Harry said, aloud. Something is already attempting to establish an unauthorized connection to the central intersection. This is why we set the solstice deadline. It is not arbitrary. Harry looked at the other 3 quadrants of the basin. The map. The architectural diagram. The text. What are those? The map shows you where the lines run and where the unauthorized access attempts are occurring. The diagram shows you what the chamber needs to complete the governance mechanism. There are 4 keys, 1 in each of the ancestral houses, that must be brought here. The text is what we discovered beneath the magic, what the ley lines actually are, where they come from, what it means to govern them. We suggest you read it. It is long. How long? It took Helga 3 weeks and she was the fastest reader of us. Right. Harry straightened. Looked around the chamber. He was aware of Hermione and Neville behind him. He'd half forgotten them during the communication, the way you forget the room when you're reading something absorbing. He turned. Hermione was writing. She had her notebook out and was writing at speed, presumably everything she'd heard. She'd been close enough to receive the thought communication too, he realized, because she'd been standing within the circle. Neville was looking at the 4 chairs with an expression that had moved beyond nervousness into a specific odd attention. He was standing beside the compact, solid chair, the one that wasn't angular or flowing or ornate, but was deep and wide and looked like something you could actually sit in for a long time, and his hand was resting on the armrest with the unconscious ease of someone who has found a space that fits them. Nev, Harry said. Neville looked at him. Then down at his hand. Then back up. Sorry, he moved his hand away. It's comfortable. Don't apologize for it, Harry said. He looked at the chairs. 4 founders, 4 chairs. Not just monuments. The thought communication had said guardian. The chamber needed a sovereign to govern it, yes, but it had been built for 4 founders working together. Hermione. She looked up from her notes. Your lineage, have you looked into it? Since your Muggle-born status was, since we talked about it in Diagon Alley. My parents and I did a genealogical search in August, she said. There were significant gaps in my mother's maternal line. Records missing, family names changed, migration patterns that are consistent with old wizarding families who went into hiding during the persecution periods. She paused. I haven't had it formally assessed. You should, Harry said. Before the solstice. She looked at the Ravenclaw chair, the ornate high-backed one with the decorative work that was clearly books and quills in the carved relief, and then back at Harry with eyes that were doing several things at once. I think the chamber was built for 4 people, Harry said. I think the hat sorted us all into Gryffindor for a reason that wasn't just personality typing. He looked at Neville. And I think your Gran would agree. Neville's hand had drifted back to the armrest of the Hufflepuff chair without him noticing. They surfaced at 2 in the morning. Harry sent his account of the chamber to Sharpfong by emergency owl before he slept, because Sharpfong operated on a you-tell-me-everything basis and he'd agreed to that. He also wrote a brief note to Ragnarok about the ley lines and the unauthorized access attempts. The phrasing attempting to establish an unauthorized connection to the central intersection was either Quirrell/Voldemort or someone else, and he wanted the goblin security assessment on which. Ragnarok's response came back by Monday morning, marked priority. It was 3 sentences. The unauthorized access pattern is consistent with a fragmented consciousness attempting to use a physical host to interface with ley energy. This is not standard dark magic. This is significantly older and requires either the cooperation of a sovereign or a period of throne vacancy of sufficient duration that the governance wards have degraded. Our assessment is that the throne has been empty long enough that the latter is technically possible. We recommend you accelerate the timeline. Harry folded the letter and ate his breakfast. You have your thinking face on, Hermione said, from across the table. What does my thinking face look like? Very calm and slightly far away, like you're reading something we can't see. He does look like that, Neville confirmed, pouring himself more pumpkin juice. I need to get the 4 keys, Harry said. 1 in each of the ancestral houses, the ones that correspond to the founders. Potter Manor for Gryffindor, presumably. Peveril Hall possibly for Slytherin, given that the Slytherin line transferred to Peveril. Ravenclaw Tower and Hufflepuff House. He looked at Hermione. I need to visit the properties. During term. Hermione said. During the half-term break. He looked at his calendar. 3 weeks. That's 4 properties in 1 week. 2 days each, roughly. He paused. I know it's fast. No, I mean, she hesitated, which was unusual for her. Can I come? Yes, Harry said. Obviously. She looked at her breakfast with the faint pleased awkwardness of someone who asked for something they wanted and actually got it. Neville said, quietly, me too. Both of you, Harry said. I'll write to the property managers today. Ragnarok said they've been keeping the houses maintained. He thought about the Gryffindor Castle property description, a working estate with sitting staff who had been waiting 200 years for someone to send orders. He'd been sending weekly management notes through Sharpfong since September. He hoped the staff appreciated the contact. The Wizengamot delegation arrived on Wednesday. Harry had been told they were coming. Sharpfong had told on Monday to say that the formal estate review he'd filed had progressed far enough that the Wizengamot's administrative council wanted to send a representative to Hogwarts to discuss the implications. He'd written back to say that he was available Wednesday afternoon and that he wanted Dumbledore present, because he had questions for Dumbledore that the presence of an official witness would make significantly easier. They convened in a small meeting room off the second-floor corridor, the kind of room that clearly hadn't been used for anything formal since the last time the castle decided to be useful. There was a long table and chairs and a fire, and Dumbledore was already there when Harry arrived, along with McGonagall, along with a severe-looking woman in deep purple Wizengamot robes whose name turned out to be Madame Longbottom, Neville's grandmother, who walked into the room with a stuffed vulture on her hat and the air of someone who intended to say everything she'd been waiting to say for 2 decades. The Wizengamot representative was a young, precise man named Croaker, who introduced himself as administrative secretary to the senior council and had an expression suggesting he'd been given this assignment because someone more senior had decided it was the safe option and someone even more senior than that disagreed. Harry shook Madame Longbottom's hand and received a grip like a vice and a look of absolutely fierce approval. "Lord Potter," she said. "Lady Longbottom. Neville told me what you said. Thank you." She made a sound that was compressed and fierce and clearly fond without being soft. She sat. Dumbledore was watching Harry with those calm, measuring eyes. Not hostile. Not manipulative. Just watching, the way an expert watches something they're trying to understand. Croaker opened his leather case. He had documents. He produced them with the efficiency of a man who wants to get to the end of a meeting without incident. "Lord Potter, the purpose of this visit is to formally acknowledge the registered sovereignty claim and to discuss the practical implications for the Wizengamot's current operating procedures." He paused. "The senior council has reviewed your claim and found it to be legally unimpeachable. The documentation is in order. There is no challenge to the claim itself." "Good," Harry said. "However, there are questions about the scope of the claim's implications for Dumbledore's position," Harry said. A brief silence. "For the chief warlock role, yes," Croaker said. "Since technically the throne position supersedes, I have no interest in taking Dumbledore's working role," Harry said. "The throne's authority is sovereign, which means it can override but not replace the administrative structure. Dumbledore continues as chief warlock. I will observe and advise and, where necessary, exercise sovereign prerogative. Practically speaking, that means any vote that affects the 8 ancestral territories or any matter of fundamental magical law requires my consent before it's binding." He paused. "It also means the review of Wizengamot voting records from 1982 to 1993 that my estate filed for his proceeding, and I'd like that on the record." Croaker wrote something down. "Noted." "The Death Eater trials," Madame Longbottom said, suddenly. Not to Croaker. To Dumbledore. Frank and Alice. Their attackers were tried and sentenced, but the people who gave the orders, who funded the operations, several of those cases were closed without full evidentiary hearings. She was composed and absolutely implacable. "I have been waiting 11 years for someone with the standing to reopen them. The review covers all trials from that period," Harry said. "Sharpfong is handling it." Dumbledore was quiet. He'd been quiet throughout, which Harry was beginning to understand was not the same as disengaged. The blue eyes were working. "Harry," Dumbledore said, "I want to speak frankly. Please. The position you're in is extraordinary and unprecedented. I have spent a great deal of effort over the past decade trying to protect you from the weight of a destiny that I felt, that I still feel, was too heavy for a child to carry. I can see now that some of those efforts were," he paused. The pause had the quality of a man choosing his words with more care than usual. "Not well calibrated. The sealed vaults. The guardianship placement. These decisions were made with the best intentions and without full information. The invisibility cloak," Harry said. "I kept it too long. Sharpfang's letter was correct. I'll return it before the end of term. The sealed letter my mother left in the Gringotts archive," Harry said. "It mentioned that she discovered the Emery's lineage 4 years before she died, which means 3 years before I was born. Did she tell you?" Something moved through Dumbledore's face. Something real and old and complicated. "She mentioned it," he said. "Once. She was uncertain of the implications. Did you tell her what the Emery's lineage meant? For magical theory? For wand lore? I shared what I knew. Which was what? That the Emery's line carried a relationship with magic that was foundational, rather than practiced. That Merlin's lineage was a matter of bone-deep resonance rather than learned skill. He looked at Harry steadily. That it meant her son would be something the wizarding world hadn't seen in centuries. And you thought the best response to that information was to put him in a cupboard under stairs and tell no one. The room was quiet. Not uncomfortably, Harry hadn't said it with heat. He'd said it the way he said most things, factually, looking directly at the person he was talking to, waiting for their honest response rather than their polished one. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment that was long enough to be real. No, he said, finally. I thought the best response was to keep you unknown and unassuming until you were old enough to understand what you were. To let you grow up without the pressure of an identity that would have crushed a less resilient child. He paused. I was wrong about the method. I was not wrong about wanting you to survive. I know, Harry said. That seemed to be the last thing Dumbledore expected. He looked at Harry with the expression of someone recalibrating. You're trying to protect the world from Voldemort, Harry said. You've been trying to do that for 50 years. I'm not your enemy. I'm also not your instrument. He leaned forward slightly. I am going to deal with Voldemort. I have a plan that's developing. I would like your help with parts of it, because you know things I don't yet and I would rather have that information formally than have to find it elsewhere. He paused. But I need you to stop making decisions about my life without consulting me. I need that to be done. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. Yes, he said. That is fair. Madame Longbottom made a small sound. It might have been approval. There's also the matter of Professor Quirrell, Harry said. Dumbledore went still. You know, Harry said. It wasn't a question. I have suspicions, Dumbledore said carefully. Ragnarok has confirmed unauthorized ley line access attempts consistent with a fragmented consciousness using a physical host to interface with intersection energy. The access attempts in August at Gringotts were directed at the Peveril Artifact Registry, specifically the Resurrection Stone entry. The unauthorized ley access is occurring directly below this school. Harry watched Dumbledore's face. You put protections on the third-floor corridor. Yes, Dumbledore said. Those protections are set up as challenges. Sequential. As if, Harry stopped. Thought. As if you wanted someone to get through them. I wanted, Dumbledore said, very carefully, to know if Quirrell would attempt it. I wanted to see how far the possession had progressed. You used the school as a testing ground. I believed the protections were sufficient. They're not, Harry said. Not against ley line access from below. Whatever's on the third floor isn't what he's after. The chamber beneath the school is. He met Dumbledore's eyes. I need to accelerate my plan. I need the 4 property keys before the winter solstice and I need to formally accept governance of the ley lines in the Founder's Chamber by December 21st. If I do that, Voldemort's access to the intersection closes. Permanently. Croaker had stopped writing and was simply staring. The keys, Dumbledore said. You know about the chamber. The Founders left instructions, Harry said. For exactly this situation. Dumbledore was quiet. Then, I may have one of the keys. Harry raised his eyebrows. I found it in the Gryffindor estate assets when I was reviewing documents that I should not have reviewed without your consent. He said it with the honesty of a man doing penance. I held it because I wasn't sure of its function. I will give it to you today. Thank you, Harry said. After the meeting, in the corridor outside, Madame Longbottom fell into step beside him and said, not quite quietly, your mother would have said exactly those things in exactly that order. Harry said nothing, but he walked a little differently afterward. That evening, with the first of the 4 keys sitting on his desk, a flat disc of dark metal with the Gryffindor crest worked in gold relief, warm in his hand in the way of things that had been waiting a long time to be picked up. Harry spread his map of the properties across the desk and began planning the half-term trip. Hermione knocked on his door at 9. She had her notebook. She had 3 books. She had the look of someone who has been processing things since Wednesday morning and has arrived at the point where she needs to say them out loud to verify they're coherent. He let her in, moved a stack of documents to make room, and waited. "Emery's," she said, sitting down. "I've been reading everything I can find. The Emery's magical tradition is described in only 2 sources that I can access in the Hogwarts library, one in magical theory, brief, mostly dismissive, and one in a very old text in the restricted section that I accessed under your library authorization." She opened her notebook. The Emery's tradition didn't use wands at all. The magic was ambient, the practitioner was the instrument. There's a description of it as the magic operating through the person rather than the person operating through the magic. "Ollivander said something like that," Harry said. "The wand chose you correctly, but," she stopped. "Chose the words. Harry, you've been doing things that aren't wand magic all term. When you unlocked the chamber on Saturday. When you spoke to the Founder's recording. When you," she looked at her notes. "Last week in Charms when Professor Flitwick had us practicing Wingardium Leviosa and your feather went up so fast and so precisely that it was the wand following the intention rather than the intention following the wand." Harry looked at his wand on the desk. 11 inches, holly, phoenix feather. He liked it. He'd been truthful with Ollivander, it felt like a word he'd always known. But he'd also noticed what Hermione was describing. The magic tended to happen slightly before he moved the wand, and the wand seemed to be confirming rather than causing. "Both," he said. "I think it's both. The wand and whatever the Emery's thing is. Working together. That would make you," she stopped. "What?" "The text called it being a magus," she said, carefully. Capital M. It's not a compliment or a title in the modern sense. It's a technical term. It means someone whose magical capacity operates at the foundational level, at the level the ley lines operate at. She looked at him directly. It means you're not a wizard who uses magic. You're someone who is magic, functionally, in the same way the intersection points are. It means accepting the ley line governance isn't something you'll need to learn. It's something you'll recognize. The fire crackled. Outside the window, the Scottish October was doing its full committed dark, the kind of dark that reminds you what dark actually means before electric light complicated the matter. Harry thought about his mother's letter. The magic you carry is not dark or dangerous or something to be afraid of. It is old. Old and warm and yours. Let it teach you. She knew, he said. She was one herself, Hermione said, gently. They sat with that for a moment. "We still need the other 3 keys, Harry said, after a while. "I know. And we still need to deal with whatever's in Quirrell's turban. Also no. And we need to figure out if you and Neville are Founder's heirs before the solstice." "I've already written to my parents about the genealogical assessment," she said. "And I may have written to Lady Longbottom with a carefully worded question about the Hufflepuff connection." She paused. She wrote back in 2 hours. She said she'd been expecting that question since 1991. Harry stared at her. Since 1991. That's this year. She apparently has a very good divination consultant. Hermione's expression said everything she thought about divination and then carefully said nothing further. She confirmed the Longbottom family has Hufflepuff lineage through the maternal line going back 7 generations. She also said, she checked her notes. She also said she put Trevor in Neville's Christmas stocking 3 years ago specifically to get him to Hogwarts with a familiar, because the Hufflepuff heirs familiar traditionally. She stopped. "Harry. Trevor's not just a toad. What is he?" "Transformed. Long-term, high-quality, almost invisible transformation. He's a guardian familiar. He's been watching Neville since he was 8 years old. She said it with the slightly breathless tone of someone who has found a thread that leads somewhere very interesting. Whoever transformed him is either very powerful or very old or both, Harry said. She closed her notebook. The half-term trip, she said. We need all 4 keys. We'll have them, Harry said. He didn't say it like a hope. He said it the way you say things that have already happened and you're simply waiting for the timeline to catch up. Hermione looked at him with that direct, thorough attention. You really aren't afraid of any of this, she said. It wasn't admiring, exactly. More like recognition. I was afraid in the cupboard, Harry said. I was afraid of being nothing. I was afraid of it being true. He looked at the key on the desk, the flat goldwork disc that a 1,000-year-old founder had made to be held by someone who hadn't existed yet. I'm not afraid of this. She nodded once. Picked up her books. Went to the door. Then turned back, with the slight awkwardness of someone who has something else to say and isn't entirely sure of the register. For what it's worth, she said, I think your mother was right. She left before he could answer. He sat alone in the good quiet of the castle at night, with the key warm in his hand and 3 more to find, and the solstice drawing toward him like a tide. Chapter 5, Lords and Liars. The half-term break began on a Friday morning and Harry was on a Gringotts carriage by 7 o'clock. Ragnarok had arranged transport that was considerably more capable than the standard model, a larger carriage drawn by 4 of the shadow horses, with an interior that expanded to accommodate 3 11-year-olds, 2 trunks, 1 extremely suspicious toad, and Sharpfang, who had decided that property visits of this legal significance required her physical presence and had said so in her Monday owl with the tone of someone announcing a meteorological fact. Hermione had spent the journey from Hogwarts to the carriage telling Neville what they'd figured out about Trevor, which had resulted in a silence of approximately 90 seconds during which Neville held the toad at arm's length and looked at him with profound betrayal. Trevor regarded him back with the unreadable patience of something very old pretending to be very simple. He's been watching me this whole time, Neville said. Protecting you, Harry said. He watched me fall out of the bath. That's what protection looks like sometimes, Hermione said, which was not comforting and she knew it. Sharpfang had read the situation with one look and said, the familiar question will resolve itself at the appropriate time. Focus on the properties. Which was the goblin equivalent of therapeutic intervention and had worked reasonably well. Potter Manor was first. Godric's Hollow looked like a village that had been making peace with something difficult for a long time. The streets were quiet in the way of places that carry a specific history, not abandoned, but thoughtful, the way people are thoughtful in the presence of something they can't quite put down. The manor itself was on the village's eastern edge, behind a wall of old stone and a gate that opened without being asked when Harry stepped up to it, because the wards recognized the blood before the brain had caught up. The house was not what he'd expected. He'd expected something frozen. Something preserved in the amber of the night his parents died, the way places in stories are frozen at their worst moments. What he found instead was a house that had continued. Not lived in, clearly not lived in, but maintained by magic that had been running quietly for 12 years, keeping the structure sound, keeping the grounds from going entirely to wilderness, keeping something operational that was waiting to be returned to. The garden had opinions. 12 years of untended growth had resulted in something that was partly overgrown and partly extraordinary, with climbing roses covering the south wall that were clearly magical in origin. They bloomed in October, which no natural rose would, and a kitchen garden that had expanded well beyond its original beds into a productive sprawl of herbs and root vegetables that had apparently been feeding local wildlife with considerable generosity. The house smelled like old wood and the specific mineral quality of good stone and something underneath that Harry recognized before he understood why he recognized it, a warm, particular quality that was his mother's magic, still present in the walls after 12 years, the way a voice stays in a room if you listen for it hard enough. He stood in the entrance hall and didn't say anything for a moment. Hermione and Neville came in behind him and were quiet, understanding the quality of the moment. Sharpfang went directly to the study and opened her case, because the estate documents for Potter Manor needed to be formally reviewed and countersigned on-site as part of the unsealing process, and sentiment was not in her professional scope. The Gryffindor key was in the library. Third shelf from the bottom on the east wall, behind a copy of Transfiguration Through the Ages that Harry pulled out and found had a hollow interior, the way safes in old houses are built into walls. The second key was a flat disc identical to the first except that the relief work showed a lion rampant rather than the crest, and it was warm before he touched it, as if it had been warming in anticipation. He held both keys together. The metal sang, barely audible, a single sustained note, the harmonic of two things that belong in proximity finally achieving it. Good, Sharp Fong said from the doorway, noting this with her professional eye. The resonance means they're genuine. I'll log the retrieval. Can I have a few minutes? Harry said. She looked at him. Then withdrew without speaking, which was the most tactful thing he'd seen her do. He sat in the library alone for 10 minutes. He didn't do anything in particular. He sat in a chair that had clearly been his father's, there was a wear pattern in the upholstery, a particular left-leaning recline, and held the two keys and let the house be quiet around him. He thought about his father's letter. The line about reckless and brilliant. The postscript about the cloak. He thought, I'll come back here properly. When there's time. He got up, put the keys in the inner pocket of his robes where they sat against his sternum with a warmth like a held hand, and went to find the others. Peveril Hall was in Nottinghamshire, which meant a 2-hour carriage ride through the late October Midlands, and it was nothing like Potter Manor. Where the manor had warmth, Peveril Hall had gravity. It was older by 4 centuries, that much was visible in the architecture, in the way the stone had settled into itself with the comfortable permanence of something that has stopped caring about human timescales. The grounds were formal, with a precision that suggested whoever had been maintaining them had received very clear instructions at some point and had continued following them with professional loyalty for 200 years in the absence of anyone to report to. The staff greeter, a wizard named Aldrich who was approximately 90 and had the manner of someone who considers 2 centuries to be a reasonable wait, bowed at the gate with an emotion that Harry couldn't quite name. Not relief exactly. Completion. Lord Sovereign, Aldrich said. Mr. Aldrich. How long have you been here? My family has managed Peveril Hall for 6 generations, my lord. We were told the heir would come when the time was right. He straightened. His eyes were very bright. I would very much like to show you the house. Harry let him. The hall was extraordinary in the specific way of places that have accumulated significance over centuries without being curated, not a museum but a continuation. There were rooms that clearly hadn't been opened in decades and rooms that Aldrich had been keeping ready with the quiet confidence of someone who never doubted the ending of a story. The long gallery had portraits that tracked like eyes, ancestors whose faces had strong features and stronger expressions, several of whom clearly recognized Harry in a way that made their painted mouths move in things he was going to have to come back and actually listen to. The Slytherin key was in the cellar. Not hidden, placed on a stone plinth in a room that was clearly an archive rather than a wine cellar, surrounded by sealed ledgers and locked trunks and the accumulated documentary evidence of what the Peveril family had known and preserved. The plinth had a carved inscription around its base, for the one who comes after. Who comes finally? The key was silver rather than gold, and the relief work was a serpent rather than a lion, and when Harry placed it against the other 2 in his inner pocket the harmonic deepened by another note, a lower, more complex chord that Hermione heard and looked up sharply from her notes. Neville was in the archive reading a ledger with the focused attention of someone who has found something significant and is deciding how to contextualize it. Harry, he said, without looking up. This is a census. Magical families in Britain this goes back to the 1400s. Longbottom is in it. He turned the page. Granger is in it. Hermione put down her notebook very precisely. What? Granger. Well, the original name is different. Something older. But there's a marginal note in a different hand, 18th century maybe, that says see also, Granger, Muggle registered. Like someone updated it later. He looked up. Your family went into hiding. Someone registered you as Muggleborns to protect you. Hermione sat down on a trunk. Harry watched her face go through several things. He waited. My mother's grandmother, she said, slowly. Her family records are gone. Fire, supposedly. My mum always thought it was strange. She looked at the ledger. Can I? Neville handed it over. She read for 2 minutes in a silence that had weight. Ravenclaw, she said, finally. The family name in the ledger, it cross-references to the Ravenclaw estates. She looked up. Her voice was extremely steady in the way of someone keeping a lid on something large. I'm not Muggle-born. My family went underground. Lady Longbottom said she expected your question since 1991, Harry said. She expected it because she knew. Hermione closed the ledger with the precise care of someone managing a great deal of emotion through their hands. I want a copy of this, she said to Sharp Fong. Already being made, Sharp Fong said, because she'd been reading over Hermione's shoulder for the past 90 seconds. They spent the night at Peveril Hall, in rooms that Aldrich had clearly been keeping ready for exactly this occasion, right down to the fires already lit and the beds turned down. Harry lay awake in a room whose ceiling had been painted, badly, lovingly, by someone who was not a professional artist but had very strong feelings about the night sky, with a map of magical Britain's constellation alignments as they'd looked from this spot in the 14th century. He thought about what they still needed to do. Ravenclaw Tower was tomorrow, Hufflepuff House the day after. Then back to Hogwarts with all 4 keys and a plan for December 21st that was becoming clearer in his mind with every piece that fell into place. The chamber. The circle. The governance mechanism. 4 heirs, 4 chairs, 4 keys in the basin. He thought about Quirrell. The timing was the problem. Accepting ley line governance on the solstice would close Voldemort's access to the intersection. It would not remove the fragment of Voldemort currently attached to Quirrell's skull. That was a separate problem and a more immediate one, because the fragment would feel the governance mechanism engaging before it was complete, would feel the window closing, and would act. He needed Quirrell handled before the solstice. He'd been thinking about this since Ragnarok's letter. The challenge was that handling Quirrell meant handling Voldemort in some form, and while Harry was not afraid of this in the way he'd once not been afraid of anything because he hadn't known enough to know what to be afraid of, he was now not afraid of it in an informed way, which was better. The ley line governance, once accepted, would give him access to something the Founders' recording had called intersection authority, the ability to interact directly with the fundamental magical structure of Britain. What this meant practically was not entirely clear from the recording. But his mother's letter had said the magic operated through him rather than through an instrument, and Hermione's word, magus, kept coming back. He was going to need to trust that. Whatever it meant in practice, when the moment arrived. He fell asleep watching the 14th century constellations on the ceiling and dreamed about a chamber filling with gold light. Ravenclaw Tower was on the Welsh border, and it was not called a tower ironically. It was an actual tower, standing alone on a hillside with the comfortable authority of something that has been the most interesting thing on a landscape for 8 centuries and knows it. The grounds were wild in the deliberate way of a naturalist's garden, everything growing, but nothing undirected. There were beehives visible from the path, a kitchen garden that suggested serious culinary ambition, and a brook running at the base of the hill that had clearly been magically adjusted to run in the most aesthetically correct direction. There was no staff here. The door opened to Harry's blood without any mediation. Inside, the tower was one large helix of rooms connected by a spiral staircase, books everywhere, not in shelves but in piles and stacks and deliberate arrangements that suggested ongoing conversations between texts rather than storage. Someone had been living here recently enough that the arrangement still felt in use, but not so recently that the fires were lit. Harry found the key in the 3rd room up, not hidden, just placed, on a reading stand beside an open book as if it had been set down while someone went to get tea and not returned for several centuries. The key was copper, and the relief was an eagle in flight, and when it joined the other 3 in his inner pocket the chord became a full 4-part harmony that hummed against his chest like something about to speak. Hermione spent an hour in the tower and had to be physically led back to the carriage. She left with 4 books she asked to borrow and which Harry told her to simply have, because it was her family's library and always had been, and her expression when he said it was the closest she came to crying that he'd seen. Hufflepuff House in Yorkshire was warm in the way that some places are warm regardless of the weather. Low-ceilinged, with beams that had clearly been added to over centuries by people who cared about the structural integrity of the work, surrounded by gardens that were doing far more than any garden had a right to in late October, with a smell of earth and wood smoke and something baked. The staff here were different from Peveril Hall, not a single caretaker but a full small household, for people who had apparently been running the property as a working farm and had been for generations, who greeted the carriage with the uncomplicated directness of people who are busy and pleased to see you and would like to feed you before anything else happens. Harry ate a very good early lunch and felt the castle's accumulated warmth in the walls and thought about Neville. Neville had been quiet since the Peveril Hall archive. Not unhappy, something more interior than unhappy, something that happens when a person receives information that they need time to integrate because it rearranges a thing they thought they knew about themselves. He'd eaten lunch carefully, talked to Trevor carefully, moved through the properties with the attentive courtesy of someone being introduced to something large and important. The Hufflepuff key was in the garden. Not in a building, in the garden, buried under a specific rosemary plant in the center of the kitchen garden, wrapped in oilcloth that had kept it dry and intact through however many seasons it had been there. A badger motif in iron, warm from the earth. Neville found it. Not because Harry directed him to it, because he went into the garden while the others were reviewing documents with sharp Fong and simply walked to the right spot with the directness of someone following a signal no one else was receiving. He came back into the house holding the oilcloth package and looking slightly startled by himself. "It was just there," he said. "Yes," Harry said. Neville unwrapped the key. Looked at it for a long time. "I've always been, everyone says I'm the one who's not very good at magic," he said. Not bitterly. Factually, in the way you state a well-established truth. Gran says I have the talent but not the application. My teachers say I have the application but not the talent. He turned the key over. Snape says I'm a catastrophe. Snape says that about everyone who doesn't already know the answers, Harry said. He says it more to me. Because you take it, Harry said, which was direct but not unkind. You accept the assessment. Stop accepting it. Neville looked at him. Then at the key. Then at Trevor, who chose this moment to make a sound that was, if you were charitably inclined, encouraging. Okay, Neville said, and put the key in his pocket. The 4-key chord, Harry felt through the stone walls from across the room, became briefly something more, a 5th harmonic, high and clear, like a bell struck on a clear day. Neville clearly felt it too, in his pocket, because he went very still for a moment and then exhaled slowly. Sharp Fong appeared in the doorway, looked at Neville's expression, and said, "Good," in a tone that was extremely brief and entirely sincere. The Wizengamot session was called for the Friday of the following week. Harry had filed the request through Sharp Fong from Hufflepuff House, formally, in his role as sovereign, exercising the prerogative to call an emergency Wizengamot session on matters affecting fundamental magical law. This was a power the throne held that the Wizengamot's own rules confirmed and that had not been exercised in 300 years, and the effect on the ministry had been, according to Sharpfang's subsequent owl, significant. Minister Fudge has responded with 3 letters in 4 hours. The first asks for clarification of the request. The second asks whether the request might be rescheduled. The third asks whether Lord Potter would be willing to have a preliminary discussion before the session to ensure everyone is comfortable with the agenda. I have responded that Lord Potter is comfortable with the agenda and looks forward to seeing everyone on Friday. The session was held in the Wizengamot Chambers in London, which meant Harry needed to leave Hogwarts on Friday morning by special ministry carriage that arrived at the gates with the slightly harassed quality of something that had been dispatched by people who were not fully comfortable with the circumstances. McGonagall walked him to the gates. She didn't say much on the walk, she wasn't a woman who filled silences with sound, but at the gate she stopped and looked at him directly and said, "Albus will be there. He is on your side, regardless of how that has looked." "I know," Harry said. "And Lucius Malfoy will be there." Her expression did something precise and specific. "He has been preparing for this session since the moment the sovereignty claim was filed. He is very good at this." "So am I," Harry said. She held his gaze for a moment. Something moved through her expression that might, in a different context, have been called pride. She nodded and went back up the path. The Wisingamot chambers were everything that should be expected of the oldest legislative body in magical Britain: tiered stone seating, formal robes, the specific atmosphere of a place where important things have been argued over for centuries, and the argument is the point. The public gallery was full, which surprised Harry until he remembered that Sharp Fong had filed the session call in the public register and the wizarding press had apparently treated it as the most significant news event since the end of Voldemort's first rise. He entered from the floor level, which was the sovereign's entry point rather than the gallery or the council doors. Sharp Fong was beside him. Behind them walked Ragnarok, wearing formal goblin robes for the first time Harry had seen, and beside Ragnarok walked Aldrich from Peveril Hall, who had apparently decided that witnessing this occasion was within the scope of his professional duties. The chamber went quiet when Harry walked in. Not the polite quiet of a session opening. The other kind of quiet, the kind that arrives when something unexpected occupies a space that has been used to expectations for a very long time. The throne seat was at the floor level. Not on the raised council tier but in the center of the floor, facing the tiers. It had not been occupied in 300 years, and this was visible in the way of long empty furniture, slightly more real than its surroundings, waiting. Harry sat in it. The chamber's ambient magic did something he felt rather than saw, a settling, like a foundation being reminded of its function. Dumbledore, at the chief warlock's seat in the center of the council tier, inclined his head. Harry inclined his head back. Lucius Malfoy was 3 seats to the left, in the Malfoy family seat, and he had clearly dressed for battle in the way of people who believe presentation is part of strategy. His expression was composed to a professional degree. His hands were folded on the rail in front of him with the deliberate stillness of someone managing a strong instinct. Minister Fudge was in the government seat, which was below and to the right of the council tier. He was a round man in a lime green bowler hat who radiated the particular anxiety of someone who has spent his career managing expectations and has just discovered that the expectations have changed. He looked at Harry with the desperate friendliness of someone hoping that a smile would alter the situation. Harry did not smile back. Not hostilely. Simply factually. "The session is called," Dumbledore said, "at the request of the Sovereign. Lord Potter, the floor is yours." Harry stood. The chamber was his stage and he moved through it the way he moved through everything, easily, without performance, with the quiet authority of someone who belongs in a space rather than someone who has claimed it. "I've called this session on 3 matters," he said. His voice was clear and carried without effort. "The first is the formal acknowledgement of the sovereignty claim, which I understand the senior council has already reviewed and confirmed. I'd like that confirmation on the public record." He looked at Croker, who stood and confirmed it and sat. "Good. The second is the estate review. Sharp Fong, the summary." Sharp Fong rose from her seat at the floor table with a sheaf of documents and read the summary in the flat, comprehensive voice of someone who has been waiting to say these things in a formal setting for a very long time. The summary covered the 14 vaults, the 8 properties, the guardianship filing, the sealed estate documents, the Gringotts access attempts in August, and the voting record review from 1982 to 1993. She read all of it without commentary. She didn't need commentary. The facts were their own commentary. The gallery was very quiet. Lucius Malfoy's hands had not moved from the rail. When Sharp Fong finished, Harry said, "The voting record review has identified 4 Wisingamot members who voted on Death Eater-related matters while under what should have been formal conflict of interest declarations, specifically, while having personal or financial connections to the accused. Those votes affected trial outcomes in 11 cases. He paused. I'm requesting those cases be reopened for formal evidentiary review. Lord Potter. Lucius Malfoy's voice was smooth and measured. The trials you're referring to were conducted under the authority of this chamber following the established legal procedures of the time. To revisit them is not only irregular but potentially destabilizing too. The procedures were regular, Harry said, looking directly at him. The evidence presented at those proceedings was not. 3 of the cases you're concerned about involved testimony that has since been formally recanted, which is in the review documents you should have read before today. He let that sit for exactly 1 second. Sharp Fong. Page 7, Sharp Fong said, and there was a rustle as everyone with a copy of the summary turned to page 7. Lucius Malfoy did not turn to page 7. He looked at Harry instead. Harry looked back. There was something interesting happening in Lucius Malfoy's expression, underneath the composure. Not fear exactly. A more complex thing, the particular calculation of a very intelligent person who has realized the game board is different from what they prepared for and is running rapid adjustments. He was good at it. Harry could see him being good at it in real time. The imperious defense, Harry said, conversationally. It's a legitimate defense. Magic exists that can compel behavior. I don't dispute that. What I'd like to understand, formally, on the record, is why the evidentiary standard for that defense in 1982 was substantially lower than the standard in any other comparable proceeding. He paused. Sharp Fong has the comparative analysis. It's on page 14. I will note, Lucius said, that this line of inquiry, while perhaps legally interesting, has no bearing on the current. It has bearing, Madame Longbottom said, from her seat 4 places to the right of Lucius, on Frank and Alice. It has bearing on their son. Her voice was absolute. It has bearing on every family in this chamber who lost someone to sanctioned murder that this body's procedural failures allowed to go unanswered. She looked at Harry. Continue, Lord Potter. Lucius said nothing. Page 14, Harry said to the chamber. Pages turned. He let them read for a moment. Then, the third matter. There is a matter of ongoing magical security that requires this chamber's attention, specifically, an unauthorized attempt to access the ley line intersection at Hogwarts, which falls under sovereign jurisdiction as the central intersection point of the 23 primary ley lines of magical Britain. He watched the expressions shift. Many of you won't have heard of this. The ley line governance structure was part of the original magical compact of Britain and has not been in active operation for 3 centuries. The relevant documents are in the Peveril archive, copies of which have been submitted to the Wysingomot registry this morning. He paused. The unauthorized access attempt is being made by a fragmented magical consciousness using a physical host. That consciousness is Voldemort. The chamber did what chambers do when a name like that is said plainly. Fudge made a sound. Harry said, on the 21st of December, I will formally accept governance of the ley lines in the Founder's Chamber beneath Hogwarts. This will close the intersection to unauthorized access permanently and remove Voldemort's remaining capability to rebuild his physical form using external magical sources. This is not a request for permission. It is a formal notification to this body of a sovereign action. He looked at Dumbledore, who was listening with the focused attention of someone hearing half of a plan they've been working on for 20 years and finding it more complete than they expected. Professor Dumbledore and I will coordinate the security arrangements for December 21st. Dumbledore nodded. One clear nod. Yes. The physical host situation will be resolved separately and prior to the solstice, Harry said. I'll be working with the Hogwarts staff on that matter. Lord Potter. Lucius Malfoy again. His voice was still smooth, but there was a different quality under it now, not anger, not quite, but something strained. You are 11 years old. You are proposing to exercise sovereign authority over the oldest magical institution in Britain, reopen legal cases that were closed by due process, and personally confront a dark wizard who murdered my parents, Harry said. Not with heat. Just clearly. Yes. All of that is accurate. He looked at Lucius with the direct, unhurried attention he'd used since Madame Malkin's. Is there something specific in those actions you'd like to challenge legally? Because Sharp Fong is right here. The chamber was absolutely quiet. Lucius Malfoy looked at Harry Potter, at the 11-year-old in formal robes sitting in the sovereign's chair with a goblin legal advocate at his shoulder and the weight of 8 ancient houses in the documents on the table, and made the calculation. He said, no. It was 2 letters. It contained a complete concession, and he knew Harry knew it, and Harry knew he knew Harry knew it, and the clarity of the mutual understanding moved through the air between them with the precision of a clean piece of work. Good, Harry said. He sat. The session continued. There were procedural details, questions, the machinery of the Wizengamot doing what it did. Harry answered what needed answering and referred everything else to Sharp Fong, who handled it with the devastating efficiency of someone who has been preparing her whole career for exactly this moment. Afterward, in the corridor outside the chamber, while Sharp Fong was fielding the queue of Wizengamot members who had questions or statements or expressions of sudden vigorous support, Dumbledore appeared at Harry's side. The physical host situation, he said, quietly. Quirrell, Harry said. Yes. A pause. I have been managing the situation. Containing it. Watching where it goes. He looked at Harry with the particular expression of a man who has been running a very complex plan alone for a very long time. I put the protections on the 3rd floor. I made them passable, I wanted to see what he'd do. You were using the corridor as a trap, Harry said. A test, Dumbledore said. To see how much of Voldemort was actually there. How much control he had over Quirrell. Whether there was still enough of Quirrell left to intervene. He paused. There isn't. Quirrell has been gone for several months. The body is functional but the person is not present. Harry thought about the turban. The careful performance. The Gringotts visits in August. He's been trying to find the stone, Harry said. The resurrection stone. He knew it was in my family's registry. He was looking for its location before term started. Yes. And when that failed, he turned to the ley lines. Dumbledore looked at Harry. He knows about the solstice. Or rather, Voldemort knows about convergence cycles. He's old enough and well-read enough to understand ley line mechanics even if he couldn't access the Founder's documentation. A pause. He will act before December 21st. I know. Harry had been thinking about this since the chamber. We need to move Quirrell to a contained environment before the solstice. Somewhere he can't access the intersection. And then, he stopped. Thought about what the Founder's recording had said. What Hermione had said about Emery's. What his mother had written. I need to understand what I can do. Before December. I need to understand the full scope of it. There is someone, Dumbledore said, slowly, who can help with that. She was your mother's mentor, in the last years before Lily understood what she was. She's been waiting. She asked me last year whether you'd been told yet. I said no. She was not pleased. He looked faintly rueful. She is not someone who responds well to my managerial tendencies. Who is she? Her name is Bathsheba Babbling. He paused. She teaches ancient runes here. She has for 30 years. She is also, by my private assessment, the foremost living expert in foundational magical theory and the Emery's tradition. Another pause. And she has been sitting 3 corridors away from you since September 1st, waiting for you to find your way to her office. Harry stared at him. Why didn't you just tell you? Dumbledore had the expression of a man who genuinely and explicitly knows the answer to this question and does not enjoy it. Because I told myself you'd find her when you were ready. Because I was still making decisions about your timeline without consulting you. He looked at Harry. I'm trying to stop doing that. Harry breathed out. Where's her office? 5th floor. Near the rune's classroom. She drinks extraordinarily strong tea and she finds wasted time offensive. He paused. Also, she will likely already know you're coming. She seems to know a great many things before they happen. Today. Harry said. She's available today. I made sure of that, at least. He paused. One more thing. The resurrection stone, do not use it. Do not let it be used. Whatever Voldemort wants it for, the use case will not be something you want to allow. His voice was steady and very serious. The Hallows are extraordinary objects and they are also extraordinarily dangerous in combination. You carry 2 of them now. Please be careful. Harry looked at him. The old man was not warning in the abstract. He was speaking with the weight of specific knowledge. You've encountered them before, Harry said. Not just the cloak. Dumbledore was quiet. We'll talk about that later, Harry said. Not here. Agreed, Dumbledore said, and there was relief in it. Harry went to find Professor Babbling. But Shada Babbling's office was identifiable from 20 feet away by the smell of extremely strong tea and the sound of someone scratching runic annotations at speed. She was a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked black hair pulled up with what appeared to be a quill and a kind of focused energy that made the room she occupied feel slightly more intense than the rooms around it. She looked up when Harry knocked on the open door. Her eyes were dark and very direct and she said, without preamble, I was wondering when Albus would get around to it. Come in. Shut the door. Tea. Please, Harry said. She poured with the efficiency of someone who has had this conversation before and wants to get to the important part. Your mother was extraordinary, she said. You know that? I'm finding out, Harry said. She came to me in her 7th year. Ravenclaw-level research instincts, Gryffindor-level nerve about using what she found. She'd traced the Emery's lineage back 6 generations and wanted to know what it meant functionally. Most people who discover that lineage panic. Your mother took notes. Babbling handed him the tea. It was indeed extraordinary in the way of something brewed to outlast doubt. She found out she was a magus. That her magic was foundational rather than instrumental. She spent 2 years with me learning how to work with it rather than around it. She never told anyone, Harry said. She told your father. Babbling sat back. He said he'd always known something was different, that her magic felt like weather rather than like a spell. That was accurate. She looked at Harry. You're the same. I've watched you all term. Every class report mentions the same thing, the magic precedes the wand movement. The intention is the primary mechanism. The wand is a focus rather than a source, Harry said. Precisely. Now. She folded her hands. We have approximately 6 weeks until the solstice. What you need to understand, and understand fully, is what accepting ley line governance actually means for someone with your magical profile. For a standard wizard it would be, a formal ceremony, an act of will, an administrative acceptance of a responsibility. For a magus, she paused. For a magus, it is a physical integration. The ley lines and your magical core will recognize each other and synchronize. It is not painful. It is, by your mother's account, overwhelming. It is also permanent. Permanent how? You will be the living governance mechanism, she said, simply. Not the administrator of it. The mechanism itself. The intersection at Hogwarts will be yours in the way your hands are yours, not owned, but integral. She watched his face. Your mother thought about this. She thought about what it would mean for you. She made me promise that if you were going to do it, someone who understood it fully would be present to guide you through. You, Harry said. Me. She picked up her own tea. I'll be in the chamber on December 21st. That is already arranged. She looked at him with the directness of someone who considers social niceties to be mildly inefficient. I also need to tell you that the process will affect the Voldemort fragment. When the ley lines synchronize with a magus, the intersection will purge any unauthorized magical presence connected to it. The fragment and Quirrell will feel this beginning to happen the moment you step into the circle. He'll act, Harry said. Yes. Before I complete the integration. Yes. She set down her tea. This is the difficult part. I know, Harry said. She looked at him for a moment. You're not afraid, she said. Not as a compliment or a challenge. As an observation. I'm appropriately concerned, Harry said. I've thought about it a lot. I know what's there. I know what I am. I think those two things are going to be sufficient. Babbling was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Your mother said exactly those words. Sitting in that exact chair. In 1978. She picked up her tea again and the conversation moved forward, and they talked for 2 hours about ley lines and Emery's magic and the mechanics of what December 21st was going to require, and by the time Harry left her office the evening had gone full dark and the corridors smelled of cold stone and somewhere a fire was burning and the castle was warm and present in his. He walked back to his room with the 4 keys against his chest, the plan fully formed, the solstice 3 weeks ahead. Everything was in place. Almost everything. He needed to have one more conversation. With Draco Malfoy, who had been watching him across the potions classroom for 2 months with the look of someone who has something to say and hasn't decided yet whether to trust the audience. Tomorrow, Harry thought. That one could wait until tomorrow. He sat at his desk, opened his notebook, and wrote the last line of the plan. Then he went to bed and slept well, the way he'd been sleeping since July, like someone who knows where they are. Chapter 6. The Throne recognized Draco Malfoy was in the library on Sunday morning, alone at a corner table with a book he wasn't reading, when Harry sat down across from him. Draco looked up. He'd clearly been expecting this at some point, there was no surprise in his face, just the careful composure of someone who has rehearsed several openings and is now deciding which one fits the room. He opened his mouth. Don't do the speech, Harry said. Whichever one you've prepared. Just talk. Draco closed his mouth. Opened it again, differently. My father came home from the Wisengamot session and didn't speak for 2 hours, he said. He sat in the study. My mother brought him tea. He didn't drink it. That's roughly what I expected, Harry said. He's not, Draco stopped. Chose something more honest. He's afraid of you. He's afraid of what the review means for him, Harry said. That's rational. Is he in trouble? The question was stripped of the rehearsed quality. It was just a question, the kind that cost something to ask. Harry looked at him directly. Draco Malfoy, up close without a potions demonstration table between them and without his father in the same room, was a boy trying very hard to be something he'd been told to be and finding the fit increasingly uncomfortable. Harry had been watching this all term. The performance was good, the drawl, the positioning, the automatic hierarchy seeking, but underneath it was something more uncertain and more interesting. That depends on what he actually did, Harry said. And on how he cooperates with the review. He paused. I'm not trying to destroy your family, Draco. I'm trying to find out what actually happened in those trials. If your father was genuinely under the Imperius, the review will show that. If he wasn't, that will also show, and what happens next is a legal process, not something I'm directing personally. Draco was quiet for a moment. He wasn't under the Imperius the whole time, he said. Then, as if he hadn't meant to say it, he looked away. Harry waited. Some of it was real, Draco said, very quietly. Some of what he did, he chose. I've known that for a long time. I don't think he'd admit it. He looked back. His face was doing the thing it did sometimes in potions when a complicated calculation resolved, a kind of reluctant clarity. What I'm telling you, this doesn't, I'm not going to use a conversation in the library against your family in a legal proceeding, Harry said. That's not what this is. Then what is it? I wanted to know if you were like him, Harry said. Simply, directly. I've been watching all term. I don't think you are. I think you're trying to figure out who you actually are without the script your father gave you, and that takes more courage than most people give you credit for. He paused. Your potions work is excellent, by the way. Better than you let Snape see. Draco stared. What? You sand down your answers in class. Give him 70% of what you actually know. I've watched you do it. Harry tilted his head. Why? A beat. Because if I was better than expected, he'd expect more. And if he expected more, I'd have to keep performing it. He said it like he hadn't fully understood it himself until it was coming out. It's easier to be reliably mediocre than to risk actually showing what you are and have someone decide it's not enough, Harry said. Draco looked at him with an expression that was uncomfortable in the specific way of being seen accurately. Yes, he said. Stop doing that, Harry said. At minimum in potions. Snape will be unbearable about it, but he'll respect you, which is considerably better than the alternative. They sat with the quiet of two people who have established an understanding without performing friendship yet. Quirrell, Draco said, after a moment. Something's wrong with him. I've thought so since the start of term. Yes. Is that what the solstice thing is about? The thing you announced at the Wizengamot? His voice was careful. My father came home worried about that specifically. More than the review. Yes, Harry said. Draco nodded slowly. He seemed to be making a decision the way careful people make decisions, not quickly, but completely. If you need something from the Malfoy family library before December 21st, he said, I can probably get it. My father has. There are books on ley line theory in the private collection. Old ones. He doesn't know I know they're there. He met Harry's eyes. I'm not doing it for him. I'm doing it because I'd like the world after December 21st to be one I actually want to live in. Harry looked at him for a moment. Is there anything specific on ley line vulnerabilities? Access points or weaknesses in intersection wards? I'll look, Draco said. Send it through the school post. Don't sign it. Draco almost smiled. You already knew I'd say yes. I thought you might, Harry said. I wasn't certain. He stood. Draco went back to his book, actually reading it now. The performance dropped. Harry walked out of the library thinking about the week ahead, and the week after that, and December 21st, and the particular shape of what was coming. The week before the solstice moved fast. Professor Babbling had been meeting with Harry every evening for 3 weeks, and by the second week of December the theory had shifted into something more practical. She'd been teaching him to feel the ley line that ran directly beneath the castle with the same deliberate attention you'd use to find a pulse, and by the end of the 3rd week he could feel all 23 of them, faintly, like a chord heard through walls. They were there the way his own heartbeat was there, constant, foundational, easy to ignore and impossible to unnotice once you'd found them. Hermione had been in the Founder's chamber 4 times, taking notes with the focused intensity of someone transcribing something important before the library closes. The text in the 4th quadrant of the pensive basin, the one the Founder's recording had described as long, was giving her the working context for what the governance mechanism actually required, and she'd been summarizing it into dense, clear notes that she gave Harry each time. He read them the way he read everything, once, carefully, keeping what was essential. Neville had been doing something that Harry noticed but didn't comment on, spending time in the castle grounds in the evenings, in the kitchen garden near the greenhouses, sometimes with Trevor and sometimes not, with the quiet purposeful attention of someone who is developing a skill they've always had but never been told to use. His herbology grades had been extraordinary all term. Professor Sprout watched him with an expression of private, satisfied recognition. The Hufflepuff key in his room had, Neville mentioned once in passing, started making a sound like a contented hum sometime around the 1st of December. Harry had also received, through the school post and signed, 7 pages of dense notes on ley line intersection vulnerabilities from the Malfoy family library. The notes were precise, well organized, and annotated in a neat hand that suggested someone had been reading around the edges of this subject for personal interest rather than assigned study. He read them twice and gave Babbling a copy, who read them once and said, "Whoever wrote these annotations is thinking clearly. Useful." Harry didn't say anything about that. He'd also, finally, written to his properties. All 8 of them. Not through Sharpfang, not through Ragnarok, but personally, 1 letter to each property steward, each estate manager, each waiting household. He told them what was happening. He told them who he was and what he intended. He told them to expect contact after December, when the year had resolved into whatever it was going to resolve into, and that he was grateful for their patience. The responses came back in stages over the week, each one different in tone: formal from Peveril Hall, warm from Hufflepuff House, extremely excited from Gryffindor Castle, where the staff had apparently been saving up 200 years of correspondence topics, and he read every one. The letter from the Slytherin Isle steward was the last to arrive, on the 18th, and was the most interesting. The steward was a woman named Morrigan, who wrote with the economical clarity of someone who doesn't enjoy formality but respects it, and who said, "The Isle has been quiet for a long time. The wards are very old and very clean. We have been watching the central intersection. We are aware of what approaches the solstice. The Isle has been preparing. So have we." She didn't elaborate. Harry didn't need her to. On December 20th, the night before the solstice, Harry couldn't sleep. Not with anxiety, he was past that, in the specific way of being past something when you prepared for it completely and know the preparation is sound. It was more like the aliveness of the night before something significant, the way you stay awake not because you're worried but because the body knows something large is tomorrow and wants to be present for all of it. He sat at his desk with the window open and the cold Scottish December air coming in and thought about the year. He thought about the Gringotts carriage arriving at Privet Drive in July with the sound of a shuffled card. He thought about Ragnarok's office and the gold spreading through the stone dish and the room full of softly glowing ledgers. He thought about Diagon Alley and Sharpfang walking 3 steps ahead, and Hermione almost dropping her book on the step of Flourish and Blots, and Ollivander going still when he said Emery's. He thought about the Sorting Hat saying Hogwarts and the 1,000-person silence that followed it. He thought about the Founder's Chamber, the 4 chairs, the silver blue pensieve, the thought voice saying you are the time. He thought about Neville's hand on the Hufflepuff armrest with the unconscious ease of someone who has found a space that fits. He thought about Hermione reading the Peveril census with the careful hands of someone managing a large emotion through their fingers. He took his parents' letters from the satchel and read them again. Not for new information, he knew them by now, had the shape of every sentence. He read them because tomorrow was going to be something and he wanted to do it with them present in some form. His mother had written, "Let it teach you." He put the letters away, closed the window, and went to bed. He slept. The 21st dawned clear and hard-frosted, the kind of winter solstice day that takes the question of shortest days seriously, with a light that was low and gold and absolutely precise, casting shadows twice as long as usual across the castle grounds. Harry met Hermione and Neville at breakfast. They ate in the particular focused quiet of people who know what the day is. Hermione had her notebook but didn't open it. Neville fed Trevor a piece of toast with a deliberateness that suggested the familiar question was going to resolve itself today whether they were ready or not. Babbling arrived at the table at 8:15 and sat across from Harry with 2 cups of her extraordinary tea and said, "How do you feel?" "Clear," Harry said. "Good." She pushed one of the cups toward him. "Drink this. You'll need the warmth." She looked at the 3 of them. The 4 chairs in the chamber require occupants for the governance mechanism to complete. Hermione, the Ravenclaw lineage was formally confirmed last week through Gringotts. Thursday, Hermione said. The Granger family is formally registered as Ravenclaw line. The name change documentation is filed. Neville. Babbling looked at him. Lady Longbottom filed the Hufflepuff recognition on the 15th, Neville said, with the steady directness of someone who has stopped qualifying their own information. It's registered. Then we have 4 heirs and 4 keys and 1 chamber, Babbling said. The solstice convergence will begin at noon. We should be in position by 11. And Quirrell, Harry said. Yes. She looked at him. And Quirrell. At 9:30, Harry went to find Dumbledore. The headmaster was in his office, already dressed with the particular formality that occasions require, and McGonagall was there too, standing near the window with the expression of someone who has been briefed fully and is processing it by being very still. He knows, Dumbledore said. Quirrell has been agitated since yesterday evening. He hasn't come out of his classroom. I have the corridor contained, no students will enter that wing. He paused. I believe Voldemort understands what is happening. He will move when you move toward the chamber. Not before. He can't access the intersection without you being at the convergence point, that's where the unauthorized connection exists. He'll need to stop you at the chamber or not at all. Dumbledore looked at Harry with those blue eyes that had the quality of looking at several things simultaneously. Harry. You don't have to go down there first. We could, he comes to me, Harry said. In the chamber. That's how it needs to work, the intersection will be active, the chamber will be fully engaged, and the Emery's connection will be strongest there. Fighting Quirrell in a corridor is an unnecessary variable. You're using yourself as bait, McGonagall said. I'm using the chamber as bait, Harry said. I'm just the person who needs to be in it. He looked at her. The chamber will do the heavy work. That's what it's for. She looked at him for a long moment. Then, don't do anything stupidly heroic. I'm trying to do something specifically strategic, Harry said. Those are very different. Something moved through her expression. She nodded. Dumbledore said, I'll be at the 4th floor entrance. If Quirrell moves toward you before you reach the chamber, I can hold him. He paused. I will not interfere in the chamber itself unless you ask me to. Thank you, Harry said. He meant it simply and completely, and Dumbledore received it the same way. They went down at 10:45. Harry, Hermione, Neville, Babbling, and Trevor, who was in Neville's breast pocket with the air of something that had been waiting for this specific morning for 3 years and was ready. The 4th floor corridor was quiet, the castle having been subtly cleared by McGonagall and the prefects on Dumbledore's request. The stone felt warmer under Harry's feet than usual, not imagination, the ley line beneath the building was active, had been building since dawn, the convergence running through the stone like a tide coming in. He could feel all 23 of them now, clear and distinct, the way you can hear individual instruments in a piece of music once you've learned to listen for them. He pressed his palm to the wall beside Barnabas the Barmy. The door opened immediately this time. No pause, no consideration. Immediate, like a door opened by someone who has been standing just inside it waiting. The sconces lit one by one as they descended, amber light following them down the 2 flights. The corridor. The chamber. The chamber was different from how it had been in October. The pensive basin was full, not to the brim but lit from within with a light that was now gold rather than silver blue, active rather than stored. The 4 metals in the floor circle were glowing, each at low intensity, waiting to be brought to full strength. The 4 chairs were lit too, the carved relief warm with a light that was clearly responsive, it brightened when the 4 of them walked in. Babbling went to the wall and stood with the quiet authority of someone who has performed their preparation and is now here to witness. Harry, Hermione, and Neville moved to their chairs. It was not ceremonial. It was not grand. 3 11-year-olds and a professor and a transformed toad who was growing visibly less like a toad with every second, Trevor's shape shifting at the edges with the slow certainty of a transformation reaching its term, until what sat in Neville's outstretched hands was not a fat disconsolate toad but a small, alert creature, compact and brown and very old-eyed, that looked at Neville with the direct recognition of something that has been keeping a confidence for years and is finally free to acknowledge it. Neville sat in the Hufflepuff chair and held it, and the chair's glow went full. Hermione sat in the Ravenclaw chair with her notebook still in her hand, and the chair's glow went full. Harry sat in the Gryffindor chair and took the 4 keys from his inner pocket. He held them together in his right hand. The chord they'd been making since he first assembled them, the 4-part harmony that had deepened and brightened with every property visit, was now something you could feel rather than hear, a resonance that moved through the floor and the walls and the pensive basin and the circle and the metal inlaid stone. He placed the 4 keys in the pensive basin. The light went white. Not blinding. Comprehensive. The kind of light that doesn't eliminate shadow because it comes from everywhere equally. And the ley lines, all 23 of them, came alive under the castle with a simultaneous clarity that Harry felt in his chest, the way you feel a chord struck on an instrument you're holding, not sound but vibration, structural, through the bone. He breathed in. He breathed out. He said, in the thought register that the chamber used rather than out loud, I am the heir of all 8 houses. I am the heir of Emrys. I accept governance of the lines. The pensive basin rose, not physically, the stone didn't move, but the light in it expanded upward and outward, and the circle on the floor blazed through all 4 metals in full simultaneous brightness, and the chamber's temperature rose by 10 degrees in 3 seconds from the sheer output of converging energy. It was overwhelming, exactly as babbling had said. Not painful. The way that looking directly at something very beautiful is overwhelming, not dangerous but requiring your whole attention, not leaving capacity for anything else. The 23 ley lines were each distinct and each enormous and each running through him the way blood runs through the body, and the integration was happening in the way his mother had said, the way babbling had described, the magic recognizing what it had found and aligning with it with the completeness of 2 complementary things. He was peripherally aware of Hermione and Neville in their chairs. Hermione was very still, her notebook in her lap, both hands flat on the armrests, eyes open and bright. Neville was sitting with the solid presence of someone who has found their center of gravity at last and intends to keep it. Then the door to the chamber opened. Quirrell walked in. He moved differently than he moved in classrooms or corridors. The stutter was gone, completely, the performance dropped with the efficiency of something no longer necessary. The turban was gone too. His head was bare, and what was on the back of his head was, Harry had read descriptions, had known what to expect, but knowing and seeing occupied different parts of the mind. The face on the back of Quirrell's head was Voldemort's, or what remained of a face when a soul had been reduced by decades of fragmentation and dark choices to the essence of a function. Not frightening in the conventional sense. Frightening in the way that something genuinely emptied of human quality is frightening, because the absence is more unsettling than the presence. It looked at Harry in the blazing chamber with the recognition of something that has been looking for this face for a decade. Potter, said Quirrell's mouth, but the voice was the back one. Harry said nothing. The chamber was still running. The integration was still happening, the ley lines still aligning, the convergence still building toward its noon apex. Quirrell Voldemort looked at the blazing circle, at the 4 lit chairs, at the white gold light in the pensieve, and understood what it was looking at. Stop, it said. Stop the process. No, Harry said. Quirrell moved forward with the swift direct violence of something that has stopped performing human movement, hand out, wand already firing a curse that was dark and purposeful. Harry let the wand answer first, the holly and phoenix feather responded to intention with the fluid reflexive speed that was becoming natural, and the curse hit a ward that the chamber itself threw up, the stone responding to an attack on the person currently accepting governance of its fundamental infrastructure the way a body responds to an intrusion. It was repelled cleanly. Voldemort's face twisted. You are a child, it said. You are 11 years old. You cannot hold a functional conversation in a chamber I've just integrated with. Harry said. I think the evidence suggests otherwise. He could feel the approach of noon. It was like watching a tide, not the minutes of a clock but the building pressure of the convergence, the 23 ley lines drawing toward their apex with the inexorability of celestial mechanics. 6 minutes. 5. Quirrell fired again. 3 curses, overlapping, different trajectories. The chamber stopped too. Harry stepped the third with a motion that was not quite wand movement and not quite intention and was both simultaneously, the Emery's quality that babbling had described, the magic already happening and the wand confirming it. The curse went sideways and hit the wall and went out. You understand what I'm doing, Harry said. He was not raising his voice. There was no need to raise his voice in a chamber this resonant. I'm not fighting you. You can keep trying that if you'd like, but it's going to have the same result every time. You'll kill Quirrell, Voldemort said. The body will die when the integration completes. Quirrell has been gone for months, Harry said. You told him that yourself. I imagine you found it useful when you were arranging the transition. He looked at the face on the back of the skull without flinching. You've been in that body since June. You know as well as I do there's nothing left to protect. A silence. Not the uncertain kind. The calculating kind. I can offer you things, Voldemort said. You have power. I have knowledge. The things I've found in 60 years of research. You had access to the Peveril Library, Harry said. I now have access to the Peveril Library. The Slytherin Archive. The Ravenclaw Tower Library. The Founder's complete documentation. Whatever you found in 60 years I'll find in 6, with the actual heir's access rather than the unauthorized access. He paused. I don't need your knowledge. I need you to stop being a recurring problem. Voldemort's face contracted in a way that was the remnant of an expression. You think this is an ending? Yes, Harry said. I am not something that ends. I have made provisions. Arrangements. I know about the Horcruxes, Harry said. The chamber went very quiet. Hermione looked at Harry. Neville looked at Harry. Babbling, at the wall, had her eyes closed with the focused presence of someone monitoring a process rather than a conversation. They were in the Slytherin Vault documentation, Harry said. Archived research notes on soul fragmentation. Your annotations are in the margins. You weren't the only person to use that vault over the centuries, but you were the most recent, and you were thorough. I've had Sharpfang file a formal Gringotts inquiry on each location you noted. He watched the face. They'll be found. That process is already running. It doesn't depend on this conversation or this moment. He could feel noon approaching like weather. 2 minutes. The integration is going to complete, Harry said. When it does, any unauthorized magical presence connected to the central intersection is going to be expelled. That's the mechanism. That's what governance means. He looked at the face on the back of the skull without anger, without triumph, with the particular clarity of someone completing a task they've prepared for. You've been using the ley lines without governance permission since 1970. Tapping the intersection energy, using it to amplify the dark magic, using it to rebuild after you were dispersed. That access closes at noon. And Quirrell's body will be taken care of, Harry said. Humanely. I've spoken to Dumbledore. The face was silent for a moment. Then, in a register that was almost curious, why are you telling me all of this? You've won this particular moment. You could simply let it complete. Because I'm not hiding anything, Harry said. I don't have any secrets here. I think you deserve to know exactly what's happening and why. He paused. I also think you've spent so long surrounded by people who wanted to use you and people who were afraid of you that someone being straightforward is probably unusual. The face looked at him. The intelligence in it was ancient and damaged and in some places genuinely extraordinary, and it looked at Harry Potter standing in the Sovereign's chair of the Founder's chamber with all 23 ley lines running through him and a wand in his hand and 2 friends at his sides and said, quietly, your mother was like this. I know, Harry said. 1 minute. The convergence arrived like a dawn, not the dramatic second of sunrise but the inexorable bright expansion of it, the moment when the horizon stops being a boundary and becomes a beginning. All 23 ley lines hit their apex simultaneously, the pensive blazed, the circle blazed, the 4 chairs blazed, and the governance integration completed with the quality of a lock finding its key, the right shape, the right depth, the absolute precision of things designed for each other finding their designed function. Harry felt it in his bones. In the way that something that was almost there is now fully there. In the way that taking a breath feels different when you've been holding it. The ley lines were his. Not owned, babbling had been clear about that, the way hands are yours, but integral. Alive and present and absolutely clear, all 23 of them, running through the stone beneath Britain in their ancient paths, governed now, stable now, accessible now only through the proper channels that were also him. The unauthorized connection at the intersection closed. Quirrell's body fell. It fell without drama, just gravity, just the mechanics of a body whose animating presence had departed. Harry was already moving, already beside it, checking. There was nothing to check. Dumbledore had been right about the months of absence, but he checked anyway because that was what you did, because the body had been a person once and the person deserved the check. Dumbledore appeared in the chamber doorway in the same moment, moving quickly, and he went to Quirrell's body with the focused practical competence of someone who has managed this kind of moment before and attends to the human requirements of it without ceremony. Harry stepped back and let him. He stood in the middle of the glowing circle, in the still brilliant chamber, and the ley lines ran through him like a river through its banks and the Pensieve's white gold light was everywhere and Hermione was beside him with her hand on his arm and Neville was beside her, and Babbling had opened her eyes and was looking at Harry with an expression that was nothing like satisfaction and nothing like relief and was both of those things completely. "Done," Hermione said. "Done," Harry said. She nodded. She let out one small breath. Then she opened her notebook and began writing, because that was what Hermione Granger did when something significant happened and she had the presence of mind to record it. The aftermath was long and would continue being long for a considerable time. Dumbledore took care of Quirrell, which was to say he took care of the body and the ministry notification and the considerable administrative weight of explaining what had happened in a chamber that no one in the ministry knew existed. He did this with the thorough, self-effacing competence of someone who has decided that running the interference is the thing he can most usefully contribute, and he did it without asking Harry to be anywhere he didn't want to be. Sharpfang's Horcrux inquiry was already running by the time Harry surfaced from the chamber at noon on the solstice, and would run for the rest of the year and into the next, finding each hidden fragment with the systematic efficiency of a legal process that has been given both the legal standing and the goblin resources to do the job properly. She sent Harry updates. He read them. He authorized the next steps. It was not exciting work. It was important work, and the difference was one he'd come to respect. The Wisingamot review ran its full course through the spring. 4 cases were fully reopened. 2 resulted in new sentences for people who had, over the preceding decade, become comfortable with the outcome of their original trials. Lucius Malfoy's case was reviewed with the evidence Sharpfang had assembled and the testimony that the review process had shaken loose from various uncomfortable places, and the result was neither complete exoneration nor prosecution but something more complex, a formal censure, a financial settlement into a fund for families affected by Death Eater activity, and a supervised probationary period before his Wisingamot seat could be used for votes affecting the families in question. Lucius had accepted this with the controlled stillness of a man swallowing something he doesn't enjoy and doing it with dignity because dignity is the only option he has left. Harry had heard from Draco that he'd spent 3 days in the study afterward and that this time Narcissa had not brought tea and he had not expected her to. Draco himself had continued sending in signed notes through the school post all year. They were increasingly less anonymous in tone. The last one had been signed with a small, precise DM in the corner, which was not technically a signature but was clearly a decision. On the last evening of term, Harry sat in the founder's chamber alone. He did this sometimes, now. The chamber had a quality to it that was not quite stillness and not quite conversation, more like the particular quality of standing at an open window when the weather is good. The ley lines ran through the floor and through him with the easy constancy of something integrated, and the Pensieve held the white gold light of an active rather than waiting mechanism, and the 4 chairs were empty but not unoccupied in the way that rooms are not entirely empty when the people who belong in them have been there and will come back. He'd been here an hour when he heard footsteps on the stairs, familiar ones, unhurried. Hermione sat in the Ravenclaw chair without ceremony. She had a book. She read. Harry sat in the Gryffindor chair and looked at the pensive and thought about the year. Neville arrived 10 minutes later with Trevor, whose shape had settled into something that was firmly his familiar rather than his toad, compact and old-eyed and permanently alert, and who arranged himself on the Hufflepuff armrest with the proprietary ease of something that has come home. Neville sat in his chair and was quiet in his particular way, the comfortable quiet of someone who has found their center of gravity and is not anxious about it. The three of them sat in the Founder's chamber on the last evening of their first term at Hogwarts, and the chamber was warm and lit and running, and the ley lines were stable and clean across the whole of magical Britain for the first time in 3 centuries, and somewhere above them the castle was finishing its Christmas preparations in its old, warm, aware way. "Next term," Hermione said, not looking up from her book. "Next term," Harry agreed. "The Slytherin Isle," she said. "You mentioned you wanted to visit properly. And the Pendragon Keep, which your estate manager said requires a separate meeting." "Separate several meetings," Harry said. "Apparently it's complicated." "Everything to do with you is complicated," she said, turning a page. "Not everything," Neville said. He was watching Trevor, who was watching him back with those old eyes. "Some of it is just very old." Harry thought about that for a moment. "That's probably a better way to put it," he said. Hermione finally looked up from her book. She looked at the pensive, at the chamber, at the two of them, with the particular expression she had when something had resolved into its correct form and she was taking a moment to verify the solution before moving to the next problem. She looked satisfied. She looked like herself. "First year," she said. "First year," Harry said. She went back to her book. The chamber ran on. The ley lines ran on. Above them Hogwarts ran on in its old, warm way, full of students heading home for Christmas and fires burning in 4 common rooms and owls coming and going with their small necessary messages, carrying the ordinary important traffic of a living world. Harry sat in the Sovereign's chair and felt the 23 lines beneath Britain and thought about next term, and the term after that, and all the terms after that, and the 8 houses, and the properties, and Sharpfang's ongoing files, and his parents' letters in his room upstairs, and Babbling's tea, and Ollivander's come back in a year, and Draco's carefully unsigned notes, and Lady Longbottom crying good tears, and Aldrich at the gate of Peveril Hall saying I would very much like to show you the house. He thought about a boy in a cupboard under the stairs, and the way that boy had woken up on his birthday with the sense that today was going to be different. He thought, yes. He thought, it was. The fire in the chamber burned warm and gold and the throne recognized its sovereign and the world was very large and there was so much of it still ahead, and Harry Potter sat in it as if he belonged there, because he did, because he always had, because belonging somewhere is not a thing that can be taken from you once you found it, only hidden, and the hiding was done now, and the finding was just beginning.